its Clean Energy Transition Program, and also under the auspice of its Network for Clean Energy Transition in Pakistan, which is being hosted by STPI. So my name is Obaidur Rahman, and I'll be moderating the event today. But I think before we actually go into the discussion, let me just set some housekeeping rules. So, I mean, where the event is being streamed on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, I can only see a lot of engagements happening over there as well. And I think speakers are encouraged to switch on their cameras, especially when they're speaking, if the network allows to do so without any disruptions. And the symposium is being recorded, and the video will be posted online. And you're all welcome to revisit the discussion later, and feel free to share it within your networks. And we also invite questions from our audience and colleagues at the end or as the session goes from all the platforms, including the ones who have joined us here through Zoom and the ones who have joined us through LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as Twitter Live. And please have the chat box open in a window as well, or you can also indicate that you want to speak by clicking the raise hand tab on the right side of the chat window as well. I think, again, coming towards the topic, the key theme we're actually discussing today in this event revolves around the need for just energy transition in Pakistan, especially in the backdrop of potential just energy transition partnership mechanisms, such as the one of Asian Development Bank's energy transition mechanism. So I think to address this issue, we'll have the discussion in two different sessions. Initially, we'll be discussing the prospects of ADB's ETM and its potential impacts on renewable energy uptake in Pakistan. Then also we'll be going into the details of exploring the other just energy transition partnerships for green and inclusive development. Now, again, with further ado, and before going into the details, I would like to formally welcome you all. And now I would request Dr. Waqar Ahmed, the Joint Executive Director at STPI, for his welcome remarks. Dr. Waqar is also working as a member of Reforms and Resource Mobilization Commission, member Board of Directors at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Board of Investment and Trade, and member of various committees and advisory boards in different sectors, including academia, CSOs, and development partners. So with this, over to you, Dr. Waqar. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Ved. Am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Waqar, you're audible.
Thank you. Thank you. Apologies for the background noise. I've just come out of a meeting. I should be joining with more undivided attention very soon. Let me formally welcome all who have really taken out time today to join us and the network, of course, for this meeting. You know, it comes at probably a very appropriate time, given that the government has recently been talking a lot about the importance of transitioning to green energy for sustainable development and addressing the climate change. Already there are preparations in this direction for the upcoming COP meeting as well. We are also encouraged to see that the government has started to discuss about the potential of harnessing the renewable energy sources and benefits of green energy transition for mainstream production processes in both manufacturing side, but also there's discussion on agriculture side as well. Now, we do understand that a lot of this discussion gets bogged down into technical challenges. And in that respect, I think it's important to continue the discussion, and today's discussion will also add value to it. We need to discuss those technical challenges at a federal level, at a provincial level, even at a regional level, you know, when it comes to adopting green energy, and the fact that there could be many issues, but as I see it, two main issues which are being discussed at the moment is inadequacy of infrastructure and grid integration. The present solutions being provided for these, of course, relate to promoting decentralizing of energy systems and microgrids to reach remote areas. I do understand that esteemed panelists who have joined us here today have been working in this direction. We're also hearing about strengthening of grid infrastructure to accommodate RE sources, encouraging R&D for improved renewable energy technologies, as well as production of these technologies locally, enhancing energy storage capacity to mitigate intermittent power supply from renewables, implementing smart grid technologies for efficient energy management. Now, all of these are good solutions, or probably solutions in the right direction, whose cost benefit needs to be discussed in more detail, But probably the most important thing is that while we talk of finding solutions of this nature, it's important to have a medium to longer term certain policy and regulatory framework. We cannot afford policy reversals at this stage, and one cannot highlight the importance of longer term policy vision so that there's private investment or public-private interest, public-private partnership interest, which can get these solutions up and running, In that respect, of course, while partnerships is one aspect, international cooperation is the other aspects, but financing the transition is something where we need guidance and advice from our panelists today as well. We do understand that the starting point for Pakistan at this point should be the domestic sources, encouraging domestic investors, domestic banks, financial institutions to offer favorable terms. But one also has to put in place the framework for attracting international portfolio and direct investments by offering longer term policy designs, including incentives. Within this, of course, one has to link the discussion on financing the green transition with the mainstream discussion being done on climate finance, and the climate fund avenues. Basically, they need to, that discussion, that discourse needs to integrate here as well. So with this, really, I want to hear and be more educated from our colleagues who are on the panel today. So I once again welcome you all on behalf of STPI and Network, and it's back to you, Ubaid.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Wakar. I think definitely the technological options, the policy consistency, it has to be the driving factors as we move forward with the energy transition. I think just one very key pertinent point that was highlighted around the mobilizing the finance to support this transition. I think just taking lead from what Dr. Wakar has mentioned, I mean, there are just, again, two angles to along which this needs to be discussed. I mean, initially what we saw at the beginning of 2023, both developed as well as developing countries found itself under poly crisis, which was driven by regional turmoil, development delays due to COVID-19, and then the constantly increasing impacts of climate-induced disasters, particularly for Pakistan, which it found itself in the form of the floods of 2020. And again, the underlying structural weaknesses resulting from these economic shocks. The convergence of these events has derailed many countries, including Pakistan, from their sustainability pathways as well. I mean, while the impacts are felt in all regions, the low economy countries, despite, I mean, having a bit low carbon footprints, are disproportionately impacted. So resiliently, it has actually disrupted the energy, food, and finance system that, again, sets new stress and shocks that are pushing millions to the poverty. Now, again, the socioeconomic crisis that also put a strain on the government budget and financial resources necessary to again, achieve a resilient and what we call a sustainable recovery. So I think before we actually go to Michael for his keynote, I think just I'll be adding another point. Like in many developing countries, Pakistan is also on the crossroads. I mean, I think just Michael, just to also provide you a bit of a page that along with other countries, Pakistan is also on the crossroads with a series of very overlapping crises that have actually exposed its vulnerability to these shocks. I mean, despite contributing less than 1% of global emission, Pakistan is ranked as the 8th most vulnerable country to climate change. And this was even beyond the floods 2020. So this presents a real need for unlocking and mobilizing finances towards the climate change mitigation and adaptation in the country to meet the NDCs, posing a significant burden on countries' already fragile economy. So again, now another angle is that is during this turmoil, we have seen an increased focus, again, going back towards the fossil-based energy sources, not even for countries like Pakistan, but it also in the developed countries as well. Hence, this also raised very major threat that any further investments in new fossil fuel infrastructure might lock in some uneconomic practices or perpetuate the existing risk and increase the threat of climate change. So thus eventually derailing the countries from their climate goals. So through this discussion we're having today, we aim to explore the feasibility and prospects of just energy transition partnerships for an inclusive energy transition in terms of financing, technical opportunities, and how any such mechanism, such as the ADB's energy transition mechanism, can be used for early retirement of coal-based or fossil fuel-based power plants in Pakistan. So I think with this, I would go to Mr. Michael Waldron. Michael is currently working as Economic Affairs Officer at Energy Division of United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. And Michael has very profound experience working globally in the field. So yeah, so over to you, Michael, for your keynote address on exploring the just energy transition partnerships for a sustainable future. So yeah, over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pull up some slides, so just give me a few moments to do that. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the slides that I'm sharing on the screen.
Yes, Michael, they're visible.
Okay, great. First, I'd just like to give a big thank you to Dr. Bakar, Dr. Walid, and colleagues at Sustainable Development Policy Institute for inviting me to speak, but also for the partnership between SCAP and your organization on various pieces of work. So on behalf of SCAP, it's really a pleasure to address this event. And the first thing I'd like to do in terms of exploring just energy transition partnerships is to give a bit of a context for the discussion. So what we see in the global energy system is to put the world on a path to meet sustainability goals. We need to see global energy investments rising by some 3 to 4 times to 2030 from current levels. So this is looking at the International Energy Agency or the International Renewable Energy Agency's numbers and outlooks. And this transition involves a massive reallocation of capital towards renewable energy, energy efficiency, end-use electrification, low-carbon fuels, and away from fossil fuels. And what we see is the investment gaps. So the gaps between where investment is flowing and where it's needed are most acute in emerging and developing economies, where the cost of capital is relatively high compared with advanced economies. And so this sets the stage for a need, and there's a need for new financing partnerships, which are required that support economy-wide approaches to transitions. These economy-wide approaches involve providing lower cost finance for clean energy technologies and enabling infrastructure, the promotion of investment grade domestic policies to stimulate renewables and deployment of other clean energy, managing the transition of fossil fuel assets, and in particular, the phase out of coal in line with sustainable pathways. And if we look at the IEA's net zero emissions pathway, for example, this calls for the global phase out of coal, unabated coal by 2040. And also supporting, amid all of this, supporting just transitions for the affected workers and communities who are part of these fossil fuel industries. And what we see is that just energy transitions have the strong potential to demonstrate such approaches, to be able to do it at scale and to provide a model that can be replicated in different parts of the world. And in this presentation, I'd like to kind of broadly discuss opportunities for JETPs to accomplish this, drawing examples from some of the JETPs which have already been announced and which are underway. But it's worth keeping in mind that the JETPs are new models for financing transitions. These are long-term models. They're quite complex, as we'll see in the presentation, and so very much a work in progress. So the objective here is not to draw firm conclusions yet, although we have some indications of what we think the success factors are for JETPs, but really to lay out the discussion points and see how this can apply, particularly in the case of Pakistan, throughout the discussion and the rest of the day. So I'd like to first kind of give a context for the energy situation in JETP countries. So essentially in this presentation, I'm going to focus on 3 countries. In the first JETP model, this was announced at COP26 in 2021, where a consortium of donor countries partnered with South Africa. And then in late 2022, Indonesia and Vietnam also announced just energy transition partnership deals with similar countries. There are also discussions for additional JETPs, so there are discussions around India, around Senegal. But in this presentation, I'll just focus on the 3 countries I mentioned at the outset, where we have sort of firm announcements. When we look at the energy systems of each of these countries, there's a commonality, and that commonality has to do with the heavy reliance on coal. And these charts show you the total energy supply by source over the past 2 decades. If you're looking at Indonesia and Vietnam, you see rapid demand growth since the year 2000. You see this rapid demand growth being increasingly met by coal. And this is especially true in the power sector, where coal now accounts for over 60% of power generation in Indonesia. It accounts for around half in Vietnam. In both of these countries, the coal-fired power plants are relatively young in age. So in Indonesia, they're about 13 years old on average. In Vietnam, they're about 8 years old. Indonesia is still building a pipeline of coal plants, and so is Vietnam, although these pipelines have kind of shrunk over time. But this presence of existing coal plants and still a coal pipeline that's relatively young raises a challenge for how do you sort of transition these assets over time. And so this makes managed coal phase out particularly challenging in these countries. In South Africa, which was the first JETP that was announced, it's a similar situation, but with some differences. So coal is still the dominant source. In total energy, it's about 80% or 75%. In the power sector, it's about 80%. But on average, coal power plants are quite old in South Africa compared to these other countries. So they're over 30 years old. They tend to be inefficient. And there's only one major plant under construction. So on the surface, this would point to an easier case for transitioning from coal in South Africa. But as we'll find out later in the presentation, things are a bit more complicated on the ground. We have seen some success in these countries in terms of deploying renewables. Notably, South Africa has had a competitive auction mechanism that's been deployed over a series of rounds. It's been quite successful in attracting international capital for building wind and solar. Vietnam had instituted feed-in tariffs, which resulted in a surge, in particular of solar PV capacity in 2018, 2020. Indonesia has also adopted some policies, but things have gone much slower there. But in general, the deployment of renewables in these countries has been inconsistent and a bit of stop and start. So renewables haven't made the inroads in the energy systems of these economies relative to their potential. And I would just note in the Indonesia graph, it looks like renewables are pretty big, but a lot of this is actually traditional renewables, traditional biomass. And so the progress in deploying modern renewables has been much slower. So overall, the objectives for these JETPs, and here I'm just going to focus on the energy system objectives, although there's a number of kind of sub-objectives for each country. And just going chronologically, in South Africa, the idea is that the JETP is aligned with a net zero emissions and energy strategy by 2050. It's also aligned with the South Africa 2030 NDC. What it does is it tries to push down the emissions range in 2030 from a baseline projection to something lower. I'm not going to read the numbers off, but you'll have it from the slides if you want to take a look later. And in South Africa, it involves crucially a transition in the electricity sector, but the JETP also involves deployment and development of new energy vehicles and green hydrogen industries. In Indonesia, the JETP is more focused, or initially more focused on the power sector. So it's consistent with net zero emissions in power and the phase out of unabated coal by 2050. And so the JETP would help to bring forward the state from 2060 to 2050. It also brings forward the emissions in the peak emissions in the power sector to 2030 from 2037. And it also raises the ambition for renewables deployment. So to account for 34% of generation by 2030 from 23% previously. And then in Vietnam, the JETP is aligned with a net zero emissions and energy strategy by 2050. It's also aligned with the power sector emissions peak in 2030, and it also raises the ambition of renewables deployment to nearly 50% of power generation in 2030 from around 35% in previously. So those give you sort of the broad energy objectives, but a bigger question is how suitable is the JETP model to these countries? Because JETPs have a lot of promise, but they may not be the best model for bringing forward financing and partnership for every country. It depends on a lot of underlying factors. And so what I've done on this slide is I've taken some research done by Singapore Management University. They developed a bit of a typology categorizing some of the existing JETP countries, but also adding in an additional country in Southeast Asia. Their paper was focused on Southeast Asia, and really trying to understand what are the conditions that would make a JETP successful. Some of these conditions have to do with the underlying power market structure and ownership patterns. And so what they find is that in general, countries with single buyer utility models with a relatively high degree of vertical integration with public ownership, these make for relatively good candidates for the JETP model. This is because these types of structures and ownership patterns provide a single entry point for funding. They provide a single counterparty for renewable policy and power purchase agreements. And they also, insofar as the state-owned players involved in the utility sector, it helps to increase the leverage of the government in terms of implementing certain reforms. In terms of the energy system, JETPs are designed to help countries get on a pathway which is more Paris compliant. And so all of these countries, I think, would be good candidates for JETPs, and also countries with relatively high concentration of coal. So the coal means that the marginal abatement cost can be lower in terms of the transitions. And so all of these countries kind of fit that bill. Financial situation is another set of conditions. And here they pointed to the notion of how open or how much debt does a country need to raise. Do they need to refinance debt from a government standpoint? Because the JETP includes a lot of different financial instruments, but debt is also an important part of it. And here they find that in South Africa, Indonesia, and Vietnam, there is that sort of condition underlying the macro financial situation that makes JETP work. And then the last set of conditions is around, is there a track record for developing clean energy policies? Because as we've heard before, and as Dr. Bakar said in his opening remarks, we need to have a long-term domestic policy vision in order to attract investment. And in each of these countries, there has been a history of developing clean energy policies, but like I said before, it's been a bit of stop and start and inconsistent. So there I've graded the circles, shaded a bit in between the dark and the blank to give it more of a moderate score. So pulling all these things together, looking at this framework, it's clear that countries like South Africa, Indonesia, and Vietnam make good candidates. In the Philippines, where the power market structure is more decentralized, where the markets are more liberalized, and you have more competitive markets, the JETP may not be the best model to help to facilitate change in that country. Turning now to the investment and finance aspects of JETPs. So what do they look like? So for South Africa, and I'm going chronologically, South Africa, donor countries and institutions, primarily in Europe and North America, they agreed to provide about $8.5 billion to support emissions reductions in coal and also clean infrastructure in that country. In Indonesia, the commitments are around $20 billion, and in Vietnam, the commitments are around $15 billion. Notably, the offerings on the Indonesia and Vietnam side are structured in such a way that half is provided by public sources, and the private sector, led by the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, is there to sort of coordinate and mobilize the other half, coming from private sector banks or institutional investors or developers. But it's important to put all this financing into context. So when we look at the JETP offer, both on the public side and the private side, or at least the initial offer, and then we compare this to the additional energy investment needs in these countries. And the way we derived these investment needs was just by looking at IEA sustainable development scenarios. For Vietnam, it's looking at a roadmap that was done looking at the power sector. But the point here is that the money provided from the JETP only reflects a fraction of what a country's energy and transition investment requirements are. So really the JETP can be seen as kind of taking a catalytic function, as being targeted. It can provide a transactional template for economies to mobilize finance at scale from multiple sources. But the devil is really in the details in terms of the successful implementation of the JETP, and also having the right enabling policies and regulations in place to continue that investment flowing in the development of project pipelines. So in the next few slides, I'd like to talk a bit more about what implementation starts to look like in practice. And here we have examples from South Africa, because in South Africa, there has been a Just Energy Transition Investment Plan that was published in late 2022, which gives you a sense of where they see the investments going, where they see the vision for the JETP and the financing. And in South Africa, what we see is the scale of investments required across a number of different sectors. So this is the JETP investment plan looking over the next 5 years. You can see there's quite a breadth of technologies that are being supported by investments. And this is not just investments from the initial 8.5 billion. This is investments across the entire investment plan. So additional financing is needed. And I'll show this on the next slide. We also see a particular focus on financing just transition aspects. So there's a carve out in the electricity sector to do this amid a certain community which is dependent on coal for its economic livelihood. There's also an emphasis on funding investments that are cross-cutting in nature to support local economic development. So it's about developing a range of energy technologies, but it's also about developing the local communities and reskilling and retraining workers as well. Not just investments, not just identifying investments are important, but and again, this is a continued theme, but what the investment plan does that I'm not showing here, but it also identifies the types of domestic policies and market reforms that you would need to enable these investments across all these different priority sectors. So you need both. You need the investment planning, the pathway, and you also need the enabling policies to give investors a clear signal of the creation of the market, but also the creation of stable regulations that would help to attract capital. Now, digging a bit more into the financing aspect of it, so it's taking these initial numbers in the investment plan, and sorry, these numbers are expressed in South Africa Rand, so they're not comparable to what we saw 2 slides ago when I was expressing things in US dollars, but you get a sense of where the money is flowing or where they expect it to flow and the types of sources and uses. Here, the emphasis again is on how to use a limited amount of public funds to mobilize much larger volumes. And here, the South Africa investment plan identified a much larger volume coming from local private actors, so stimulating the role of domestic banks, domestic developers. There's also this light blue portion on the very top, which represents money that they still need to allocate or money that they still need to find from the financing community. This could come from international investors, it can come from institutional investors, the capital markets. But again, it's important to put in the right policy frameworks to attract that. One potential promise of the JETPs is to put in a transaction template or to create a transaction template that can be replicable across projects and help to drive down the cost of investing. So using common language in contracts, reducing the cost of negotiation processes, and being able to roll this out across a number of different clean energy projects. This is an important way to catalyze finance, particularly from international investors who are not used to doing business in a country. Another aspect is around the type of funding. And so the chart on the right shows you the financing from the International Partners Group. So this is that initial tranche of public finance coming from the donor countries. A big question is the degree of funds that are concessional versus commercial, offered on different terms. And another big question is how much of the funds should become in the form of debt, so they need to be paid back, versus outright grants, which don't need to be paid back and which can be quite powerful and quite catalytic. But as you can see from the chart on the right, in terms of the South Africa offer, things like grants constitute a relatively small portion of the finance being provided. So that's an important question for countries and for recipient countries and donor countries to work out in terms of developing the plan and the overall architecture of the JETPs. Now, we've talked a lot about the energy system, investment, and finance, but I'd like to turn to the question of how to ensure transitions are just and inclusive. In some areas in JETP countries, coal represents a major source of employment and economic output. The graph on the left just gives you a flavor for the role of coal mining in the economic development in Indonesia. So on a national level, it plays a relatively small role, but in certain subregions, it plays a relatively large role in terms of driving the economics. So it's important to put in place coordinated long-term engagement, both within and across countries and regions, to assure that infected workers and communities are part of the transition, they're trained with skills for the future needs of the economy, and they're not left behind. And on the right, what we show is a framework from the World Bank, which shows how energy transition for workers and communities is supported in coal regions. And this is based on their work in countries in Europe and North America, and actually a few SCAP member states. And in summary, with the frameworks on the right, there's a lot of material there. But what a JETP can do is it can provide integrated support to coal regions through reskilling and retraining, through planning and activities for local economic diversification, for measures to rehabilitate coal mines, land, and infrastructure, and make them fit for other purposes. Now, we've talked a bit about some of the implementation considerations, and I'd like to talk a bit about some of the risks. And there's a number of risks, but one of the most poignant ones is related to energy security nowadays, which we've already heard. And this is showing you the example of South Africa again. And in South Africa, you have a trend of, and of course, in countries around the world, energy security concerns have risen over the past 2 years. But notably, the implementation of the South Africa JETP is potentially threatened by a worsening electricity market crisis, which saw load shedding rise to record levels in 2022. And these challenges stem from a number of kind of persistent issues in the South Africa case. It's an increasing trend of unplanned outages at aging and inefficient coal plants. It relates to the deteriorating finances of the single buyer utility, which is Eskom. And because this deteriorating financial position, this undermines the ability of the utility to carry out operations and maintenance at the existing plants, and also hampers investments in renewables and investments in the grid. So this type of crisis is prompting a lot of discussions in South Africa over whether to delay the retirement of the coal power plants. But such delays do not necessarily solve the problem, which is related to the underlying coal plants themselves, as well as kind of persistent lack of reform in the country. And so what we found looking at international experiences over the past few decades is that other countries faced with these types of energy security situations have found that rapid market reforms that help to accelerate private investment in generation and sometimes in infrastructure can really help to put the system on a more sustainable and secure path. So in that regard, the JETP poses a good opportunity to do this. But we'll see how things evolve in the South Africa context. So on the last slide, I'd like to just share with you some conclusions. And really the top line, or the bottom conclusion, the top line conclusion, which we have on the bottom of the slide, is that JETP success hinges on the speed and effectiveness of implementation. And what we've done here is we've taken a framework from a recent paper by ClimateWorks, and I put the source down in the notes, and applied some of the lessons and some of the success factors that we've heard, also taking into account a UN SCAP event that was held in April on financing JETPs. I'm not going to read all these, some of these echo what is already in the presentation, but on the energy system side, it's really being able to prioritize halting the development of new coal power and the managed phase out of existing plants, but doing so in a way which addresses the adequacy and social system adequacy and social concerns. In particular, there's a really good opportunity to think of solutions to repurpose coal plants. And even in South Africa, there's a repurposing ongoing with one plant that had been retired. But it's important that the coal phase out be managed in such a way where you're scaling up the renewables part, you're scaling up the clean part. And in that regard, a focus on grid and system integration, including interconnection, is critical. And it's not something I've discussed so much in this presentation, but it's something we heard from Dr. Vakar in his opening remarks about the necessity of investing in and upgrading the grid. From a financing standpoint, it's clear the consultative process between providers of capital is very important, involving banks at a very early stage, both local banks and international banks, to be able to put in place transactional templates which can replicate on transactions, can really reduce negotiation processes, and can reduce the cost of investment. It's important to really understand the role of grants, concessional finance, newer instruments such as carbon credits, and also for countries to offer technology transfer as part of making JETP successful. And also being able to manage currency and liquidity risks, which is particularly poignant for international investors. From a governance standpoint, some of the success factors have to do with setting up a cross-government coordination body, having that strong buy-in from across the government to address all the different bottlenecks that clean energy projects encounter. Developing an initial investment plan is good, but you have to take a dynamic approach to investment planning so that investment plan becomes a living document, which is updated over time and reflects changing market conditions. And it's important to have private sector organizations like utilities in the discussion. And in organizations such as SCAP, we can also provide a platform for exchanging on these issues and sharing experiences at the regional level. And then finally, certainly not least, though, is the socioeconomic aspect, being able to focus in JETPs on economic diversification and job creation in core regions. Again, consultative processes are very important, as are enhancing access to sustainable energy for the many people around the world who still lack access to electricity or clean cooking facilities. And then to have an active process for monitoring impacts on the labor markets and formulating policies which help workers and communities to adequately transition. So I hope that provides a good overview of some of the issues. Very much look forward to hearing the discussion of the rest of the day, and I'll turn it back over. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Uwe.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael, for providing a very comprehensive analysis of JETPs in Pakistan, JETPs in Indonesia, Vietnam, South Africa, and very candidly highlighting the potential challenges there could be, again, the investment plans. And again, I think it was very important to see how the role of different financing institutions could be mobilized through this. I think there's a lot to take forward from this point, and it makes a very good ground to further discuss the case for Pakistan and also the learnings we have from these countries. So I think with this, we'll be moving towards the first panel discussion on prospects of Asian Development Bank's energy transition mechanism and its potential impacts on renewable energy uptake in Pakistan. So we have been joined by very esteemed panelists. We have been joined by Dr. Fayaz Ahmed Chaudhry, who's currently working as the director of Lums Energy Institute. Dr. Fayaz has over 35 years of experience in senior management roles, power system planning, project management, along with various other leading positions. Has also been served as the managing director of National Transmission Dispatch Company, NTDC, and deputy director of primary transmission planning at Water and Power Development Authority previously as well. We're also being joined by Ms. Fiza Qureshi. She's currently working as the manager of program implementation at Indus Consortium. And Ms. Fiza also possesses a wide experience of over 15 years work experience in research, project management, advocacy, networking, and capacity building. And prior to this, she has also served as the provincial coordinator at Democracy Report, DRI, Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, and other esteemed organizations. So again, welcome to you, Dr. Fayaz, Ms. Fiza. We've also been joined by Mr. Asad Mahmood. Asad is a well-known renewable energy and energy efficiency expert, and he's currently also a technical advisor for sustainability, decarbonization, green financing, and carbon markets implementation in Pakistan. Prior to this, Asad has also been involved in various roles in Pakistan's energy sector, including being the head of technical services and company secretary of National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. Again, to give the Indonesian perspective, we have been joined by Ms. Saharani. She's working as a researcher in the Indonesian Center for Environment Law, Indonesia. She's also a good experience of conducting research on various environmental issues, including environmental human rights, climate change, and energy policy. Last but not the least, we have been joined by Dr. Khalid, who's currently working as the lead researcher at the Energy Unit of Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Dr. Khalid is an energy economist with over 10 years of experience in this sector. And prior to this, Dr. Khalid has also worked as a research lead at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, and he was also the assistant professor and a faculty of University of Gujarat. So again, on behalf of SDPI, thank you all for joining us in this session. And I think just before going to Dr. Fayaz for his remarks initially, I'll just try to give a pitch of what, again, I think Michael has very extensively explained the JETPs. So I think, again, I'll just be giving an overview of ADB and what ADB is actually doing in Pakistan's towards energy transition mechanism. So I think, firstly, we do understand that ETM is a very scalable, collaborative initiative that is being developed in partnership with developing member countries. That is actually to leverage a market-based approach to accelerate the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy projects. So ETM again funds to retire coal power assets on a earlier schedule than if they remain with their current owner. So the basic idea is that ETM will be a win for the climate, a win for the local communities, and a win for in a broader for developing economies. And it will significantly shorten the life of legacy coal-fired power plants and unlock new investments going into the sustainable and renewable energy. Now, coming to ADB's energy transition mechanism, in 2021, ADB launched ETM, a program that was actually aimed at helping confront the issues of climate change by reducing these emissions in Asia and the Pacific. So ETM began initially with, I think Michael very elaborately explained, it began with pilot countries in Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, and was then extended to Pakistan and Kazakhstan as well. So in Pakistan, actually, ADB initially secured almost $3 lakh in technical assistance to conduct a pre-feasibility study that began in October 2022 and is expected to be completed by July. I think many of the stakeholders have also received the initial findings, and it is actually going forward as well. So in fact, we have seen the initial findings that were shared by ADB team and with relevant stakeholders, and we'll also try to address some of those as we go ahead with the discussion as well. So I think just to very briefly summarize the key objectives, for this seminar, we'll be discussing the potential opportunities and challenges of transitioning away from coal-based power plants in developing countries such as Pakistan, and the role ETM can play in this. We'll be analyzing the strategic alignment of ETM with Pakistan's national goals, such as nationally determined contributions, and what are the shared lessons and practices for the implementation of ETM in other countries, and particularly Indonesia. So I think with this, we'll be coming to first esteemed panel, Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry. And sir, along with the aspects that you want to highlight here, I would also request that in your opinion, how well does the ADB's ETM address the challenges and opportunities of transitioning away from coal-based power plants in Pakistan, and what improvements or modifications would you suggest in ADB's ETM process or pre-feasibility study to better align with Pakistan's energy security, affordability, and climate goals? So yeah, with this, over to you, Dr. Fayaz. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ubaid. Actually, before starting a discussion, let's have a little geographical sense of our demand and supply system in the country, so that because it relates to energy security as well as our seasonal needs for the energy in the country. So let's look at bagasse. This is very again green, you can say a renewable generation resource, but quite less. The coal is now, the installed capacity is 5,940, and out of which about 4,000 still is 13 into 3. Yeah, about 4,000 is imported coal, and about 2,000 is now local coal. So there are gas power plants. 5,000 megawatt is brand new. You can say these 13 or 1,200 plus megawatt each for combined cycle power plants that we installed. Those are relatively new, and some of them are 10, 15 years old, and few of them are 25 years of age. So hydro currently is 10,681. And then nuclear is not going anywhere. So it is, you can say, so this is a base load plant. So every plant that, I have, shown, luckily or rather unluckily, all these are base load plants. So the oil, which is relatively old fleet, this is around 8,500, 600 megawatt, and our I think 2,300 odd is our renewable. So this is what is in the country. Now, why the map is there? So all except one Sahiwal 1,300, all coal plants are in the south. 2,000 megawatt of Tharkol, and then around 2,600 megawatt of Port Qasim, as well as China Hubco. So they are in south. Similarly, our nuclear is in south, which is 2,200. Only Chashma is about 1,300 megawatts, so that is in the north. So why I am mentioning these things? If you look at the percentage number, which is 30% of installed capacity, which is base load capacity, primarily, is down south. But the problem is that we do not have enough transmission capability to transfer all that power to north, because transmission is lagging. That is why in the market you must have heard for the last few years, like there is a curtailment of wind, there is this issue or that issue because of that transmission constraint. And you can see like province of Sindh and Balochistan, both provinces, they do not even constitute 19% of the energy demand of the country. That's where the challenge is. So even this is like total energy demand, including K Electric. And by the way, K Electric generation capacity is not in. So out of 45,000 of megawatt of our installed capacity. So from that, this is only the percentage I wrote is only NTDC system. So if the demand south is not that much, all that power has to be transported to north. So that's where this Jimpir corridor or even Rojan, maybe a better choice in the beginning. Later on, maybe Jimpir. That's it, restricting the wind generation development in that area. So yes, solar can be put anywhere. So that's why the government is thinking, so wherever the transmission is already there, they're trying to replace imported fuel-based power plant. They're not building a new transmission. What they're saying is, let us replace that fuel with this 600 megawatt of solar, or maybe Muzaffargarh and really Badar Shah near and Balokia on these sites. So as a fuel replacement. So because what you need is two things: enabling environment on the political side, on the financing side. No, that's one thing. But enabling of this energy transition on ground is through the transmission infrastructure. Yes, rooftop solar and those feed-in tariffs, that is approach, but that is may not yield that good results. I don't know in the to foster this transition. So our focus, so that the reason I'm putting up this, there are two objectives. One, understanding the ground reality, as well as look at the number. Peak demand supplied was 25,564 in 21, and we did not supply in 22 even 22,000. This year, I'm not sure what we will supply. So the demand, peak demand capability in the system is much more. But what happened because of the skyrocketed energy prices and short of dollar in the country, we couldn't import because all our plants are, except this hydro and the nuclear and solar, this is, but in winter, you don't have much wind. Solar is also, let's say 4 o'clock, it is not there. Now, hydro comes down to even maybe 1,000 or 1,500 or maximum 2,000. So from where will you meet that demand of 12,000 plus in winter? It's all has to be through thermal, through fossil fuel. because otherwise you have to shut down this country. The problem with hydro is it is not available in winter, especially December, January, these 2 months, and even February. So what do you do with these 3 months? So either you need nuclear or a lot of wind and solar so that you can compensate the loss of hydro. So I'll go further. I just wanted to set a base to understand the dilemma of the country. One is its physical nature of this country is it's a longitudinal, long distances are involved. And then generation resources, well, maybe our stupidity, why would we put 2,000 megawatt of nuclear down south when there is no load? We should have put it somewhere in near Chashma where the existing one. But those decisions have been already made. And our coal plants are also down south, which we thought that they will be base load, will be imported. I can understand, but there is no demand there. So all those power plants have been transported to north. So our major focus is should be to have adequate transmission infrastructure to facilitate energy transition. Now, look at here. The next, up till next 7 years, what you see, this is committed plants. This is already, decisions are made. So your installed capacity stands way ahead, there, way above what your demand is. So this orange color is your demand and the availability of generation as you, with the current plan, with now 10,000 of sort of even renewable that is planned, it is showing quite decent reserve margin. And on the percentage side, on the right hand side, you see there is a surplus, margin, sufficient surplus margin in the next, 7 or 8 years, as far as the generation is concerned. So the only thing can be done is fuel replacement, and then we need to ensure that we do not lose the reliability or so I'll skip off this. This is challenge because of added capacity. Look at our fuel component it's a stagnant. It is, our energy payments are reducing, although our energy supply is increasing, but our energy, price is reducing because of hydro, because of renewable. But look at our capacity payment. Capacity payment is, going through the roof because of our, now more hydro is coming like Dasu. There are capacity payments there as well. So that is the challenge. Anyway, so and here is the sort of, if you dispatch all these plants on an economic merit order, and this local coal, you can see this only, although it's 2,000 megawatt, because it runs as a base load all year around. So the maximum contribution, from 23 onward, because now that capacity has increased, to 2,000 megawatts. So they will be running most of the time, and imported coal will also be running because of the wasteland. And the reason is the 50% take or pay. If you do not take 50% off take, still you have to pay. So that's why that their contribution is more, although they are not competitive anymore based on the new prices. So look at our RLNG new plants, hardly dispatched. Furnace oil hardly dispatched because of their automatic. But because of transmission constraints, they still will be somewhat dispatched, but not much. So what we can do is to replace this imported coal. If we can do that 50% of take or pay contract to maybe not maybe retire, but at least bring it down to 30%, maybe to 20%, whatever, maybe to 0%, so that we can inject more renewable power generation. So this is the ground reality. So 20 metric ton per annum is basically the imported, local fuel, and 10 is imported. So that is an opportunity to reduce. Now this is, so I'm not going to go over this. This is the graph that I wanted to show to everyone. This one graph tells everything if somebody really likes to understand what is this really showing. So this is almost 6 years of data. Actual, not a single number is quoted. Actual recorded information showing us 6 years of information in every hour of those 6 or 7 years. Now, this dark blue at the bottom shows winter months, 4 months, November, December, January, February, 4 months. So look at our last year when this demand was really high, 24,564. Because we opened up some package to the industry, we closed down those captive power plants. That's why the demand at night went to 8,000. Otherwise, if you see the previous year, it never even touched the 7,000. So it was always below 7,000. And if you look at the data, naturally before 2017, it is 6,000, 5,000, whatever that number is. So this is what your base load is. Now, what is your peak demand occurred in 21 in that winter between 21 and 22 was 12,300. But in the previous year, it never even touched 11,000. So that is what your real demand is. The orange graph that you saw, that's a post load shedding of those feeders which Parliament decision scored the system operator that you can turn off those feeders because they do not pay. So this is in winter the envelope is about 2,000, and in summer that envelope is around 3,000 to 3,500. But the alarming number. So this is very good. So the actual peak was supplied 4,564. What was the actual peak demand? If you include that the peak demand we did not serve, and naturally for the few years to come, we will not supply unless we have some sort of law and order situation better, recovery mechanism is improved, overall governance of the sector is improved. But this is the number, all this exercise that we did at LUMS, 18,000 megawatt difference between winter peak and summer peak. What is this load? This is air conditioning load. And air conditioning load or cooling load, fan load, which shouldn't have been there. We simply created this load in the last few years because of our wrong housing practices. So that is where the dilemma is. So I'll show you the other numbers. Look at this number, the peak 1,000 megawatt from 23,000 to 24. We only supplied for 85 hours. And if you look at the top 2,000 megawatt, we only supplied for 430. And can you just imagine the kind of investment is needed for those 2,000 megawatt? I just did the calculation for 1,000 megawatt if we reduce that peak. So you will save $124 million of capacity payment, $921 million in 1 year as your energy payment. So the total saving is more than $1 billion. Just by reducing, 1,000 megawatt of peak. So we do not need to install that peaking capability. So that is, and if you reduce 2, you just save $2 billion. Because our contracts are 66% take or pay these plants when they were. So here I'm coming to conclude, very quickly. So look at the maximum terawatt hour we supplied in 2021, 22, 143. You know what? 53% of that energy got sold to domestic. So, yeah, 53% got sold to the domestic sector. Now, what does this tell me? That our winter demand of 4 months, look at the growth rate, blue, and look at our summer growth rate. It's exponential. And I'll tell you what's happening here. So this is not sustainable. What are we trying to do in the country? So if assume that in Pakistan are 12 months of winter months, then we would have sold 1 or 2 terawatt hour of energy. But because of summer, which is a short lived, we only sold 41 terawatt hours of to supply that cooling load, and maybe only 10 to 15% of people are using this. Rest of the 85% people, they cannot even afford. So to supply that cooling load, so if you look at the capacity factor is less than 30%, but the capex we spent is $84 billion. And if you include electric, then $92 billion for which you are paying the capacity payments and debt servicing for the next whatever many 10 or 12 years. So this is the dilemma that we are in. So this is not sustainable. Certainly, absolutely not sustainable. So what we need to do, our focus has to be on the demand side. What we have been talking about for the last 7, 8, 10, whenever, always supply side. But we never talk about demand side. What are we trying to supply? Is it really, should we even supply? Should that load be even there? So look at the 2007 and 20 comparison. So our system-wide, basically our winter demand is 12 and we supplied 24 in summer. Right away, over 100, but demand was 30. So over 150% of your peak demand occurs due to cooling load. That we need to curtail if we want to really, and look at our challenge in winter. Our summer gas demand is at 6 or 6.5 or 7 BCFD. Look at our demand in winter. Because of our round houses, you need space heating, water heating, unnecessary. We could have avoided this. We could have made better choices in constructing our houses. So look at how much we spent, $2.7 billion just haath sekne ke liye main isko kehta hu. So can this country really afford that sort of dilemma? So what we need to do, the untapped opportunity for us. So existing houses are new building. So we need to revise building code, all our money, all our funding, all our energy transition has to cater demand side as well as supply side, so that we insulate our buildings properly. So we make our houses oven first. If you look at our houses on the first floor, it is kind of oven. Otherwise, you could have avoided it. Otherwise, in our 50-year-old construction practices, our top floors were never like that. They were verandas, they were roshandals, they were like window openings. So there was a very good circulation, okay, and high ceilings. So our forefathers adopted those practices, but we left those practices and made boxes, our houses, all DHAs, all, look at your commercial buildings. They're basically, they're now bound from every side. So you are 100% dependent on, air conditioning. So this country is spending 20,000 megawatt of capacity with less than 30% of utilization only दीवारें ठंडी करने के लिए. That's what I wrote. I couldn't find a better English. I said we are trying to cool walls here, not sustainable. So this is the point I wanted to bring everybody's attention, that we must work on the demand side management. Many ideas there.
Yes.
So please,
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Fayaz. I think we completely agree. Demand side management needs to be addressed along with the planning suppliers as well. So I think just again to bring the discussion towards again the ADB's energy transition mechanism, I'll be coming to Ms. Fiza Qureshi. So Ms. Fiza, you have extensively worked on ADB's ETM. So based on its feasibility study of the ETM and what the initial findings were, and so I think I would just come to you, like, what are your thoughts on using the ETM as a tool to expedite Pakistan's energy transition, considering the country's energy and economic security considerations? And also, can you highlight some of the shortcomings or limitations that you feel were not adequately addressed in EDB study? Yeah, over to you, Ms. Fiza. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ubaid, and thank you, STPI, for inviting me in this symposium. And really, thank you very much for the worthy panelists, especially Michael, for giving the very deep dive on the JETPs, and Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry on energy demands and the transitions. So today, I really, as you said, that I would really like to share our experience and the work we are doing on the energy transition mechanism with the civil society. You know very well that Indus Consortium is working as the secretariat for the Grow Green Network, which is the network of 25 civil society organizations working on the just energy transition. So when the as you said, that the pre-feasibility study on the ETM for Pakistan, it was initiated in October 2022, and it was supposed to be end in July 2023, and the draft is shared with the civil society and also Grow Green Network and some of other civil society organizations. They have conducted several meetings with ADB on that pre-feasibility study, and Grow Green Network has also submitted their written submissions and the concerns of the civil society to the ADB. And mainly today I will reiterate and share those concerns with all the worthy panelists and our audience. One of the main concern is the data disclosure. The pre-feasibility study, the 3 documents they have shared, but those reports are not uploaded on the ADB website. And many of the CSOs and the stakeholders which have direct concerns with the process but don't have direct line of communication with the ADB will be, of course, left out of the entire consultation process. And so in this regard, we really urge ADB to upload the tentative documents of ETM along with the transition in local languages. It is very important because wherever the coal power plants which are supposed to be phased out in the future, so if those communities, broader communities, they are not having the access in their local languages over the documents, then of course the real spirit of the consultation will remain as it is. So it's very important. So we really urge to ensure that data disclosure, transparency, and openness while sharing all the relevant documents regarding the ETM. And although ADB has mentioned that assessment and consideration of impacted communities will be covered during the feasibility study analysis, but the communities mentioned in that draft, Those constitute only those communities that are engaged with these assets and owner companies as their employees. So the stakeholders mapping explained in the studies do not include or consider the broader communities that are being impacted by these polluting power plants, and no indication of carrying out assessment for compensating the broader communities and areas that are adversely impacted due to the polluting assets. So we think that the ADB needs to broaden the scope of just transition concept when it comes to engagement with the communities for the compensation. And according to the draft feasibility study, MCA, the identified 3 power plants out of 5 power plants have a life cycle of 10 years. But the entire process of, the completing ETM pre-feasibility and feasibility study afterwards and making it approved with the consent of the government will take 2 to 3 years. And afterwards, the process of engaging with asset owners and then negotiating to conclude a fair deal will further take roughly 2 or more years. So, as Michael was sharing, the whole process of JETPs and all these power plants and what we have observed in the Indonesia and Philippines, that is a very slow process of negotiations with the asset owners. So we really urge that the identified coal power plants should be of longer life cycle so that its phase out should not be burden on the taxpayers' money. And in addition to this, the power plants which are identified for retirement under MCA are mostly of medium capacity. The medium capacity of these power plants will not take the retirement process towards renewable energy acceleration overall, since the majority of energy mix would still be dominated by the thermal power plants after the ETM process, as very deeply and in detail Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry has shared with us right now in his detailed presentation. That when the schemes like ETM, they are introduced, of course, there are several concerns and questions they are arising. When the IGSAP of Pakistan has the local coal share and the imported coal share, the share of LNG is there, and local natural gas power plants are there. So, and the share of RFO as very much detailed in Dr. Fayaz's presentation. So in such kind of scenario and the moves of the government, which we are observing and watching on the television on daily basis. So what would be the roadmap with ADB in this complex situation? And in this scenario, how the ETM is going to work? So these are very important questions and concerns of the civil society, which needs to be addressed and sit together and having a very detailed consultation over it. And a very important aspect of the pre-feasibility study is this, that it is silent on the gas, even after raising concerns on the gas aspect as a transition fuel on the very initial stage by the civil society of Pakistan. And that the technical assistance grant that is allocated to support plans for the ETM in Pakistan is also supporting the pre-feasibility study for the ETM in Pakistan. So of course, civil society has the genuine concerns whether the ADB is really thinking the gas as a transition fuel. And so we urge ADB to reconsider its decision of not incorporating gas-fired power plants in its pre-feasibility studies for ETM Pakistan, And another main relevant and related question to this is this, that what will be done with the mega infrastructures and the land of the phase out coal power plants? How those mega infrastructures, how the land acquired, and how the whole system going to be utilized after the phase out of the coal power plants. So these are what some of the main and key concerns and the deliberations, and of course the suggestions in this regard to the ADB from the civil society and community side. So I will stop here, and if there would be some questions regarding that, so I will happy to answer. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Fiza, for being very pertinent. And I think some very relevant points raised around the data disclosure. And I think definitely the point you raised for the communities, I mean, their needs have to be incorporated with it. So again, thank you so much, Ms. Fiza. I think just for the questions you mentioned, I think there some of the audiences have posted some questions in the chat box. So if you could just perhaps address those in that, and I think we'll see we're running a bit short on time. And if we see we needed, we'll come back to you as well. So I think with this, taking the discussion to Dr. Khalid. Dr. Khalid, you've also been engaging with cross coordination with ADB and this ETM. I think on behalf of SDAP has also provided some very inputs to the ADB's initial findings and its drafts. So coming to you, Dr. Khalid, so based upon your suggestions and opinions and the review of these documents and the preliminary findings, how do you see ATM going forward, and what challenges do you see in continuation of what Ms. Fiza has also highlighted? So yeah, over to you, Dr. Khalid.
Thank you, Ubaid, and thank you so much for all the worthy speakers, including Dr. Fayaz. Mike has provided very insightful discussion on JETPs and what can be the specificities of JETPs. I would be short and I would be brief, but first let me discuss some of the sustainability aspects and some of the development economics aspect and energy economics aspect to it. In energy economics, in terms of energy economics, Pakistan is facing like a 3E crisis. I always mention this crisis is about economy, this crisis is about energy, and this crisis is about environment. And these three are interlinked, and we are stuck in a vicious circle of economy, energy, and environment. We are making cheap and dirty fuel decisions, and we are keeping coal in our energy profile due to our turmoil in economics, which is causing environmental problems, which is causing like climate change issues in Pakistan, which is degrading our air as well. These environment issues are translated back into our turmoil into economy. In terms of development economics, we are stuck in this vicious circle of energy poverty. And in development economics, there is a notion that we are poor because we are poor. So taking that into energy economics perspective, we are energy poor because we are energy poor. So we need to have two-pronged approach. Like in energy economics, there is two set of theories. One is known as internalization theory, which Dr. Fayaz has very vigorously mentioned in his presentation, that we need to look into our demand side management. The second one is dependency theory, which elaborates and which says that we are poor, or we are energy poor, or we are making bad decision in terms of energy economics because we are dependent on foreign fuel, or we are dependent on fossil fuels. So what we need to do is we need to integrate both these approaches. We need to get correct our demand side, but we also need to correct our supply side as well. So in terms of Pakistan, the vicious circle of energy, economy, and environment, we need to investigate these both sides. For this, I think ETM, Energy Transition Mechanism by ADB, Asian Development Bank, is a very, very good step forward. Because in Pakistan, the first and foremost problem is that we do not have capital to finance our RE projects, or we do not have capital, to be specific, that we do not have capital for early retirement of coal. because coal is very cheaper to us. Coal provides us a very economic solution, but that economic solution is not sustainable to us in terms of environment, in terms of green energy. So ETM, Energy Transition Mechanism, is a very good initiative of ADB, but there are some challenges that must be considered if we want an effective implementation of ETM or other sort of JET-fees arrangement. The first and foremost is, as Dr. Bakar has also mentioned, is infrastructure and grid integration, because renewable energy is very volatile to grid, and the situation of our grid system is like that. We have faced a nationwide breakdown a few years back. Second challenge is that investment and financing. Third is technical and operational challenges, because RE is a very technical kind of subject. We need to have capacity building on that. Last thing is that what would be the workforce transition if we want to look into, or we want to go into this transition process, because all the jobs that are associated with coal power plants, those would have to be converted into renewable energy jobs or other alternatives. In that scenario, we also need some sort of capacity building as well. What are different things that can be looked for if we want to assess or technically assess or critically assess that pre-feasibility report that Fiza has mentioned in his presentation. First one is that if we are going for ETM, first thing we need to be aware is that it is some sort of debt arrangement. Pakistan is already a debt-riddled country. What if it accumulates more debt for Pakistan? Second is we need robust data and analysis if we want to select coal power plants. These coal power plants should be very pinpointed in terms of energy, in terms of energy security, in terms of financial aspects, and in terms of obviously the just energy transition. Second is what would be the monitoring and evaluation system. I would be very, very keen to listen from our Indonesian colleague that what is the monitoring and evaluation perspective of this whole energy transition mechanism when it was implemented in Indonesia. Second is what is local context adaptation, because in Pakistan, in policy circles, there is a very pro-coal debate because coal is a very cheaper and economically feasible option in Pakistan. Then there is capacity building issue, how capacities have been built, public awareness and engagement, that is very, very important. Then lastly, the job loss and prospects of green jobs. How can, what is the plan under ETM that, what would be the job loss if we retire some coal power plants in early retirement phase, and how these job loss can be converted into green jobs and capacity can be built. So what are different opportunities of this this whole ETM thing? First, obviously, the clean energy transition. Pakistan needs clean energy transition if we want to survive, because let me be very blunt here. We consider hydro as a very basic and imperative thing for Pakistan, hydropower. But keeping climate change in mind, what if hydro is not renewable for Pakistan in like 25 to 30 years from now? Because in terms of climate change, the weather patterns are shifting, or glaciers are melting, or hydro is totally dependent on that seasonal ice melting from our northern areas. What would be that scenario? Energy diversification is a very important aspect of this ETM. We can obviously diversify our energy portfolio. Obviously, this would saves us billions of dollars if effectively implemented. And lastly, obviously, jobs will be created. So I think there are opportunities, there are challenges, but to end this speech on a positive note is that we need to look into the sustainability, and we need to look into the broader and long-term perspective for Pakistan. And I think that is financing or RE through our international partners, through partnerships, through JET-fees, and through initiatives like ETM. I think China can be a very key and insightful partner for us. we need to have climate and energy transition diplomacy very effective so that Chinese investment can be brought into renewable energy and we can explore some sort of Chinese alternative to this Asian Development Bank's energy transition mechanism, which would be very thoughtful and which would be very long-term and sustainable solution for us. So I think in the favor of time, I would
Yes.
rest my case and over to you, Ubaid.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Khalid. And I think just taking lead from what Ms. Fiza has also mentioned, Dr. Khalid has also mentioned, I think we do have we're getting to the point where we do understand that there is need to go back to the methodological framework of ADB's current ETM and try to address the missing linkages there, trying to address the missing gaps there, and just to have a broader acceptances of all the stakeholders, especially we're going ahead with the plan that involves, again, definitely the last substantial flow of the financing. So I think just along with Pakistan, we also, we initially have also discussed the ADB's, the ETM process being followed in the countries. So I think Indonesia is one which has actually gone ahead with it. So we're really pleased to be joined by Ms. Sayaharani. So Ms. Sayaharani, what key question from you is that how does Indonesia perceive the ADB's ETM as a means for addressing the just energy transition, and how well did the ETM address the social and economic impacts of the energy transition for Indonesia? And I think you have been listening to the case of Pakistan for a long time, how jet peace. So are there any specific lessons or best practices that can be shared with other countries, including Pakistan, and in their pursuit of energy transition? So yeah, over to you. So, thank you. Thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you, Ubaid, and thank you for the honor to speak in this forum. Well, in case of the ETM in Indonesia, as Michael have mentioned in his keynote speech earlier, that Indonesia is a very coal-dependent country where 60% of the power, more than 60% of power supply comes from coal-fired power plant, and it also contributes to around 80% of the country's GDP. So transitioning to cleaner and more sustainable energy has been a very tough challenge for Indonesia, especially when there are a lot of coal plants currently in the pipeline and still under discussion to be built for the next following years up to 2030. So ETM is very critical moment and important tool to help Indonesia accelerate energy transition by opening channels for transition financing and also renewable energy deployment. And for Indonesia's case, the ETM will be blended into JETP's 20 billion deals. So the ETM will provide more or less 2.5 billion US dollars for energy for coal, CFPP retirement, and renewable energy deployment. And those numbers will be included into the 20 billion US dollar JETP deal. So basically, ETM is like a part of JETP for Indonesia, and will be managed by the same special mission vehicle of the Ministry of Finance, where they will raise funding and allocate funding from the JETP or other source of funding such as philanthropies or multilateral bilateral finance to PLN or IPPs or any institution that aims to accelerate renewable energy in Indonesia. Well, I think in Indonesia's case, some of the issues raised in this forum earlier have also resonated in among the particularly civil society organizations that have concern in energy transition issues. For example, for now, since most of the projects under ETM or JETPs are still under discussion and are still under planning because the comprehensive investment plan is still under process in the JETP Secretariat. So we are not really sure how or what the selection criteria for the retired plans will be. For now, there is still not there isn't any clear criteria or what plan would be retired earlier. And the list, I mean, like there is a list going on. For example, the plans, the CFPP that PLN aims to include into the retirement list. But the problem is most of the CFPP included in the list and proposed to be retired under ETM or JETP mechanism are mostly very old plans that will go past their economic capacity by 2030, for example. In Indonesia, there are probably 6 to 9 old CFPPs that was initially planned to go over 4 years of operation. And these plans are in the list of plans that are going to be retired through the energy transition mechanism. I think it will be a problem because these plans are supposed to be naturally retired since they have gone past their economical years, and they have and most of these plants have very inefficient technologies and cause a lot of environmental pollution and impacts. During time in Indonesia will involve carbon trading and gaining carbon credits from the CFPP retirement and renewable energy deployment. There will be also issue with carbon credit integrity if the funding is allocated to these older plants, because there will be no additionality to the credit, since these plants are supposed to be retired by 2025 when they reach 40 years old, the common operational years for coal-fired power plants. And there's also issues with disclosure and information, access to information for civil society, and particularly impacted communities regarding to the process, to the negotiation process between, for example, in Cirebon 1 CFPP, the negotiation is still under the process, but the impacted communities, for example, around the Cirebon 1 CFPP have not yet know about the plan to actually retire the Cirebon 1 CFPP. And although the initial process of CESA, the regional assessment have been quite frequent and open to civil society to attend, enjoy, and also give inputs to the ADB. But after the process have been done, there is no update or there's no updated information regardless the process of ETM, since most importantly ETM is now currently under JETP, so the whole thing is still under planning and still being discussed within the relevant stakeholders. But I think it's important for ADB and relevant stakeholders, for example, the Deputy Secretariat for Indonesian case and relevant ministries, to actually disclose or maybe give information to the public about the process on JETP, just so the civil society and general public can actually monitor the progress, the transition progress so far. And I think also one of the most important thing is and I think it has been mentioned a lot of times by the previous speakers, is the supporting policies and framework that needs to be in place to support energy transition. Well, for Indonesia's case, when we are talking about the economic and social impact from energy transition, for now, there is no policy on workforce transition currently in place in Indonesia. And in the process, the Ministry of Manforce is not closely engaged in the process. So this is like for the social and economical impact when it comes to workforce transition, there is still a huge gap that needs to be filled in the process to ensure that the impacted workers will have the skills needed to actually adapt to the new energy system and to adapt to and can actually move to, for example, green jobs and opportunities created by the energy transition. And there is also promotion of women in STEM, and another thing is the change of curriculum in engineering schools, for example. There's not yet anything in place for now. So it's still like a huge homework for Indonesia to think about how to fill that gap. And aside from that, I think Indonesia has just recently enacted a presidential regulation that supports all CFPP retirement, but it's still insufficient because it still allows the CFPP currently in the pipeline to be built. So the homework is mostly focused on influencing the ministry and PLN, for example, to actually cut down the proposed CFPP currently in the pipeline. I think it's also important to create exposure for the IPP owners on the benefit of transitioning, to help them to promote agreement on CFPP retirement. Because in Indonesia's ETM case, the Cirebon 1 CFPP retirement is also started because the owner is interested in the transitioning scheme and repurposing, or maybe the financing scheme. So I think educating or enhancing understanding of the IPP owner is also one of the most critical thing to be conducted in the transition process, because it can help easing the negotiation process of coal-fired plants retirement, since I'm sure some of the early or middle age CFPP are owned by IPPs and not only by the state-owned utility company. I think those are some of the key takeaways from Indonesia's ETM.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was again very pleased to hear about the real-time experiences of Indonesia. And I think we'll be, discussing it further, but just in interest of time, I'll be requesting Asad Saab to sort of bridge his discussion between the both panels which we're having today. So we had a very good discussion, very detailed discussion around the ATM. And I would also like to explore, as we move forward with the climate finance need, we would also like to explore, I think just taking lead from what Dr. Khalid also mentioned, that there's a potential to link the potential JETPs in with possibilities in the Chinese energy plants, any possibilities of Chinese JETPs as well. So I think we'll be going a bit beyond now ETM to discuss what financing opportunities further exist. So I think before going to directly to Asad, I think Asad, let me just give a very brief overview of what the panelists are today for the second panel. So the second panel is in which we'll basically be discussing how to go forward with the JETPs, and it's basically exploring the Just Energy Transition Partnership for Green and Inclusive Development in Pakistan. So we're very pleased to be joined by Mr. Matthew Gray. Mr. Matthew is currently working as the CEO and co-founder of Transition Zero. And Matthew is a financial analyst with a prior extensive experience of working as a managing director of carbon tracker analyst at International Energy Agency, IEA, and other esteemed organizations. We've also been joined by Mr. Mohammad Mustafa. Mustafa is currently working as the program officer at Renewables First, with a profound experience working around renewable energy uptake in Pakistan and mobilizing finance to support clean energy transition. And along with this, Mustafa is also engaged as a project manager at World Wind Energy Association. We've also been joined by Mr. Hassan Javed, who's currently working as a research fellow renewable energy at SARC Energy Center, where he's conducting policy-based research on renewable energy technologies for South Asian region. So prior to this, we engaged with Ministry of Climate Change, ANACON, now known as NICA, and Alternate Energy Development Board. And last but not the least, we've also been joined by Mr. Vedant Aditya. He's a senior researcher at Institute for Essential Services Reform, Indonesia. And he's also responsible for conducting research on energy transition in Indonesia towards 100, efforts to reach 100% renewables. And as a part of this, is also working on decarbonization of the country's available thermal power plants. And so I think we have been joined by a very good panel, but I think I'll be coming back to you, Asad Saab. That Asad Saab, if we look at again ETM as well as JETP is a process to expedite these climate finance, mobilize these finance towards renewable energy projects. So I think if we look at the nationally determined contributions, NDCs of Pakistan, so again, a lot of financing of needs, financing demands as well, there also have been extensively highlighted in Pakistan's country climate development report. So Asad Saab, over to you. How do you suggest that under these conditions and in the framework of ETM, do you think we need to look at again the NDCs and what revisions are there proposed? And how do you see the whole agenda towards this one? So yeah, over to you, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been listening to the panel members and also got an opportunity to go through the questions and comments, pertinent points that have been raised. So whenever we look into the development partners perspective, and specifically the institutions like World Bank and ADB, like the first term or the civil societies mostly start focusing on the terminologies like debt trapping and things like that. But nevertheless, these are the keywords and buzzwords over which new policies and actions have to be formulated, and leapfrogging has to be done. While everything is revolving around energy, ETM, and JETPs, so definitely one also needs to look into enhancing the scope from only power generation perspective to other energy consumption scenarios which are directly being used, or like you can say like fossil fuel dominated energy intensive industrial sectors. So like the transitions could also be looked into that aspect. But looking into like only the power sector scenario, because our discussion is mostly revolving around that thing so far, and nevertheless, you would not get rid of the capacity traps. No matter whatever you do, either you go for ETM or a quick net zero targets attainment, but a certain intermingling or certain tweaking has to be done by our policymakers over here. So, but nevertheless, we are still interconnected with the international arena. And one of the connecting string is the Paris Agreement, to which Pakistan is a signatory. And while the Paris Agreement basically encourages countries to enhance their ambitions over time, it also acknowledges implementation of NDC targets. And basically, they should be in line with each country's national circumstances. And you know very well that what our national circumstances are these days in terms of as the 3 E's which have been highlighted over here by Dr. Saab. So keeping all these three E's intact, and so many other E's which are not unknown, but they are also other hidden factors as well. So like, so including the economic constraints, if a country faces economic challenges or constraints that make it difficult to achieve the existing NDC targets, so it may consider revising the targets to a more feasible and realistic level. So, reducing the NDC targets can be a legitimate option if the initial targets proving to be overly ambitious, or if there are significant economic barriers preventing their achievement. So it does not demonstrate that we are moving away from our commitments, and we are not ready. We are not able. We are not contributing to the global efforts, but it shows our readiness and tracking, because under the Paris Agreement and UNFCCC protocols, when the enhanced transparency framework is coming into action, and all the countries have to report their NDC tracking activities, and all these tools, JETP and ETM mechanisms, they have to be referred somewhere in some document which Pakistan has to be submitting on a mandatory basis to ensure the NDC targets are on track, or if not, so that is something like and I think like this is a dialogue where both groups or both the sessions with participants can also look into, and not only from the perspective of clean energy transition, but as one of the question and keyword was also discussed about climate resilient infrastructure, is basically that is something we need to focus upon, climate and clean clean and climate resilient infrastructure. So that is something like we need to look at, and when we talk about only like cooling as a sector, so I think like one of the rationale in putting up the power plants or enhanced capacity, so the economic activities which can turn down or enhance our industrial production facilities and ramp up their demand, we need to look into those economic interventions. So we need to look into like how those things could be formulated under the JET-P plans. Like we need to enhance the industrial demand or their productivity, and develop such policies which enable scaling up our production levels and bringing in investment on the basis of all the principles which can provide a foundation for JET-P and ETM mechanism, and enhancing and fostering partnerships, keeping in view the NDCs should be the center of attention for all the efforts, and 60% renewable energy target which has been spelled out in the NDC. So that is something like I think this platform on which we are speaking today can also take a deep dive and look into whether we do need to look into the revision, keeping in view the local economic constraints, technical constraints, and any other such constraints. So we need to do it right now, not at the end of the target lines, what we have committed so far. So I conclude over here.
Yes, thank you so much, Asaf. Very nicely highlighting the need, connecting it with the climate financing as well as resilient development needs. So I think just again, now I'll be coming to Matt. Matt, you also fortunately have been able to listen to some of the very key highlights and insights and suggestions from what Pakistani stakeholders think about the energy transition mechanism as a form of JET-Ps. So I think now coming to you, Mike, what we would like to hear from you is that what are some of the very key examples of JET-Ps that exist globally, and how financing opportunities and the JET-Ps can be utilized to support energy transition for developing economies particularly, and also again utilizing JET-Ps to effectively address the need of marginalized communities. And again, how do you see that identifying specific strategies based on successful implementation? What have been the key learnings in it? So I think Mike, do let us know if you want to share any presentation. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to speak at this event. It's a thrill to be here. I'll just share my screen quickly. If you can let me know if you can't see.
Yes, it's visible. It's visible.
It's visible. Excellent.
Yeah, and just sorry, Mike, just to add to one thing, I think we'd also love to see how Transition Zero's expertise have actually what's the Transition Zero's experience and their expertise actually helping to bridge the data and modeling gaps in energy transition planning and bridging this gap for the JET-Ps as well. So yeah, my apologies for this. Over to you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'll speak about is how we have been involved to date in JET-Ps and what we're trying to do to support JET-Ps and climate finance more generally. So just by way of background, Transition Zero is a climate analytics not-for-profit. We're established in 2021, and what we're trying to do is to build energy transition products which are usable and accessible to all. What we do with those products is we partner with mission-aligned organizations with the ultimate intention of creating a global standard for energy transition planning. Data by far isn't the only barrier to climate finance flowing to where it needs to go, but it is a significant barrier. And our mission is to stop arguments about data. So there are more scope for working on other issues like the one we're discussing today, which is the just transition. How do we make sure that money is flowing in a way that reflects the changes that the energy transition is going to occur over the coming years and decades. So what I'll talk about is just to give a very high level overview of JETP and the recent examples. I won't dwell on that too much because I have been listening in, and this audience seems very well informed. Then I'll sort of go into a bit more detail as to what we do on data and some of the work that we have done recently on Indonesia and how we hope to support the Indonesian JETP Secretariat and the stakeholders associated with the JETP process more generally. And then I'll just sort of touch on some of the opportunities and challenges, and hopefully that will set up for an interesting discussion. So the idea of JETPs, of course, is to incentivize emerging markets to decarbonize, shut their coal fleets in a manner that is consistent with their development priorities. And this is a list of the JETPs that are out there at the moment. I think the details of the JETPs vary, both in terms of the amount of finance, the type of finance, but ultimately I think what the donor countries are trying to achieve. But principally it's around, I think, providing finance with the idea of creating a more efficient electricity system, and that can vary depending from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So for Indonesia, for example, it's about helping incentivize PLN to reform so renewable energy can be built out in a far more efficient and risk-free way. With regards to South Africa, it's more around reforming Eskom to ensure that it provides electricity sustainably and reliably. And then there's obviously Vietnam, which is an emerging JETP, and India and Senegal, which we don't know much about because the conversations are under discussion. This is what the JETP governance structure looks like. So I've just taken some information here with regards to South Africa. So broadly speaking, there's three components. There is the International Partner Group, which is the donor countries who provide the capital. There's the task team, which is the host country, and they interface with the ministerial committee and the politics of the host country more generally. And then right in the middle of that, there's the JETP Secretariat, which has the challenging task of bringing together those two groups to develop a financing package and plan that is consistent with, or not consistent, palatable to both parties. And I think that's where the real challenge occurs. And of course, part of that challenge is, I think, data availability and transparency, and that's where we try and cover it. But what I would say is that JETP governance does depend to a large degree on the political system and the market regulations of the electricity system. Electricity is inherently country specific, so regulations and market constraints change from country to country and region to region. So the Secretariat tries to accommodate that, or should accommodate that, when coordinating between these two teams and trying to come up with a financial package that is not only going to be palatable to both parties, but is also going to attract additional money from the capital markets. So I'll just touch on what we're trying to do. And this slide sort of just sets up how we see the data problem at the moment. JETPs and energy transition more generally does require energy planning tools, and typically those tools come from big electricity systems models to inform 2030 power development plans. And what we have found, and this is particularly the case outside Europe and the US, is that most of the tools and data underpinning plans are inaccessible. The options available to low-income countries, I think, vary from consultancies to intergovernmental organizations such as the IEA, as well as local think tanks and academia. But within that, what we have found is that we think that electricity systems planning tools are not as accessible as they need to be. And that accessibility does prevent wider stakeholder engagement. And where we're trying to get to with the tool that we have developed, which is Future Energy Outlook, is we want to reduce the usability barriers to the extent where non-modelers, so someone who doesn't have coding experience, can go onto our platform and run their own scenarios and not get bogged down and confused by the tool or the website that they're working with. And that's what we're trying to do, and is something that we recently released for Indonesia, which I'll get to in a couple of slides. So what our platform does, Future Energy Outlook, is it creates an auditable and accessible model tool and data platform. So we scrape data from a number of sources, we validate that data with local partners, and work with a number of think tanks in the jurisdictions that we're building models for. And then we have this platform which produces a suite of models. They can be capacity expansion models, which are the type of models that inform power development plans and therefore can inform the JETP framework and process more generally. And then we share that data in a way that is useful for different audiences. So if you're a coder or someone technical, you can access an API. If you're a policymaker and you just want to read a document, you can read our slide packs. Or if you are someone who wants to develop your own scenarios, regardless of whether you're a modeler or technical person or not, you can jump on our website and run those scenarios yourself and get a better understanding of what an energy transition future will look like for the country that you're interested in. So this is exactly what we did for Indonesia. We developed a number of model runs for the region, and this is the interface that we have developed. Access is available on our website. You just need to log in. And just to explain very quickly some of the findings of what we did. So we developed 3 scenarios: a current policy scenario, a least cost scenario, and a net zero by 2060 scenario, as well as an early coal retirement scenario. And the reason we did that is we wanted to understand, based on the money that the donor countries have presented, the 20 billion, how much of that 20 billion could contribute to closing and replacing coal in Indonesia, and what would that cost relative to how Indonesia's electricity system works at the moment. And what we found is that Indonesia can potentially save up to 2 billion while maintaining system reliability by closing 21 gigawatts of coal. And that is based on the fact that the Indonesian electricity market is quite oversupplied at the moment, very high reserve margins, and also the fact that over time, renewable energy will become progressively more cheaper. And there's a big potential for Indonesia to build out solar photovoltaics, which is based on the modeling and the assumptions that we have, is the technology that has the greatest potential over the long term in the region. I'll just touch on some of the opportunities now based on our perspective, which is data. I think there's three things to mention. We're principally a technology company, and we think that technology can help reduce the usability of barriers associated with electricity systems modeling. And for stakeholder engagement to be effective and efficient, we do believe that data should be open, and the tools underpinning energy transition planning should be accessible and replicable to anyone who wants to use them. And that's why we developed the platform that we have recently launched for Indonesia. And we think if data is open and the tools are accessible, the consequence of effective and efficient stakeholder engagement is there's a greater potential for a just transition and a electricity system which is both affordable and appropriate for the country in question. There are a number of challenges, of course, and these are sort of three challenges based on our experience. The first is the macroeconomic environment. Inflationary pressure is hugely problematic for a number of GP host countries. Climate finance has always been problematic. There's not enough finance, and in particular, there's not enough of the type of finance required for some of these host countries to make the transition. And that's just been exacerbated by inflation, because renewable energy is capital intensive, and therefore if inflation increases, the cost of capital increases, and therefore renewable energy becomes more and more costly. The second is host countries are very sensitive about data security and availability. So I think this is partially a cultural difference. So in Europe and the US, data availability is pretty good. You can get a good understanding of stuff like the grid topography of a country. You can find data on generation and emissions, because there's all this regulation making that data accessible and available to everyone. That's not the case in a number of host countries. Information about the utilization rate of coal plants or grid topography, grid assets is something that's considered to be highly confidential for a number of host countries. And I think that is just something that donor countries need to be sensitive about and need to respect, because that is just ultimately a political decision. And I think lastly, and this is probably my main point with regards to JETPs more generally, is donor countries need to build capacity, not dependency. And the easiest way to do that is to train and facilitate the host countries so they can lead this transition by themselves. And that's why we're committed to providing tools that are publicly available, that are open source and can be replicated and audited by anyone who wants to use them, but especially these host countries who need tools to drive this transition on their own. I'll just stop there because that's the end of my presentation.
No, this was amazing to hear from you, Matthew. And I think thanks a lot for wonderful work going on to Transition Zero. I think I will definitely be going on to all the work you have done and looking at your scenarios and the results and how it makes sense. So thank you again. And secondly, thank you also for all the challenges and opportunities you have highlighted for just energy transition for countries. So I think with this, I'll be going to Mustafa Saab from Renewables First. Mustafa, I think you've also been listening to the JETP's modeling, different models and different examples we've heard since morning for a lot of different countries as well. So I think in your perspective, what do you think about the, I mean, even going beyond ADB's ETM, how do you think the JETP's actual implementability in Pakistan's case, and what could potentially be the policy hurdles and governance issues in implementing these? And I think, secondly, Mustafa, if you could also highlight what role do you envision for JETPs in terms of their alignment with the government goals related to, again, energy security, availability, economic development, and also linking it with Asad mentioned around climate change mitigation. So over to you, Mustafa. Thank you. Just let us know if you need to share your screen as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Ubaid. I will actually be sharing my screen. Let me know once
Perfect.
it's visible. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible. Yeah.
Let me just adjust that real quick. Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation and for the wonderful discourse that we've been undertaking since the start. Again, I'm audible? Yeah, perfect. Sure. So I guess you've already delved into quite some detail on what a JP is, but I still think it's a good reminder to put this out there back, put this out there again. And I think it's very important to understand that JP is just a financing mechanism. It isn't more than that. Essentially, it's just a mechanism where different countries can actually facilitate their energy transition by actually coming together with different networks, be it public networks such as international partner groups or private sector, including the GFANs. So what the JETP wants to do is basically facilitate heavily coal-dependent emerging economies, and I think these are very important terms. So all of these fit very well with Pakistan's scenarios, where we are also heavily coal dependent, an emerging economy. We have good renewable energy potential, and the key element, I guess, is towards the just energy transition. So essentially, a JETP is a combination of loans, grants, and investments. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that it is heavily dependent on grants, but that's one area where I think a lot more improvement is needed, and I guess I'll be shedding more light on this as we go along. But essentially, there is a lot of opportunity for countries to transition in a just manner using this mechanism of JETP. The IPGs again, so I wanted to highlight how it is actually a partnership. Once you envision what a JETP is, it's actually a partnership of different public sector economies. It could be, typically it is the G7 countries, but in some scenarios, in some cases, we've seen other partner organizations coming into it as well. We also see a bit of, political economy playing in on who is leading the JETP for what country. So you will see, Japan play a key role in Indonesia. I think it was UK perhaps in South Africa. So again, a lot of those elements also come through, but it's also quite interesting to see how GFANs has stepped up after the COP in Glasgow, and how almost, I guess, 550 different financial institutions are now part of the GFANs, which are actually facilitating this whole investment portfolio of different just energy transition partnerships. I also wanted to highlight how different CRMs and ETM, basically coal retirement mechanisms and energy transition mechanisms, are in the works across the globe to facilitate decarbonization of economies. So the JETP was initially envisioned as a mechanism, as a financial mechanism to facilitate developing countries to undertake their just energy transition by the developed countries. Essentially, a method to disperse climate finance, a method to disperse energy and transition finance. But since then, it's taken up to a different shape altogether. As new countries join, as new IFIs, MDBs join this initiative, we feel like the design has changed a lot with regards to JETP. We've already had a wonderful discussion on the different JETPs that are happening across the globe, so I wouldn't delve too much into it. But I would like to talk more about how we envision that a JETP essentially has three key elements. And this also brings me back to your question on how Pakistan, is Pakistan well placed for it? Is there an opportunity for Pakistan to utilize JETPs? Well, these are the three elements that essentially constitute a JETP agreement. Number one, it's a coal phase out commitment and plan. So as I've already mentioned, Pakistan has put a moratorium on coal, imported coal essentially, and new coal projects in its NDCs. We also have we are also part of ADB's ETN, so there is the discussion of early retirement of coal finance power plants happening. But what we would also need to do for a JETP to materialize is declare a peaking of power sector emissions by a certain year. On the power side of things, Pakistan does have a percentage share of RE capacity. So we are looking at 60% RE, essentially 30% VRE and 30% hydro by 2030. And we also know that the net zero roadmap is also in the works in Pakistan. But the key, I guess the most important output perhaps of a JETP mechanism is the comprehensive investment plan. And when we talk about an investment plan, it isn't just limited to finances, it's also talking about policies, what needs to come online, what needs to change, what will happen, what is the cost of that happening, including technology, including, policy, regulatory, local capacity. All of those things are actually developed in a comprehensive investment plan. I guess we are again limited in terms of what CIPs we have available. Indonesia's CIP is due, I guess, on the 16th of August. Vietnam has a few more months. I guess theirs due in October. But essentially, a CIP is the government actually putting numbers to what an energy transition will cost to them. It's very important to understand that this isn't going to be the whole value of the JETP. Essentially, an energy transition CIP can cost around 100 billion USD, but a JETP might only cover a portion of that, say 5 to 10 billion, 8.5 in South Africa's case, 15.5 in Vietnam's case, or 20 in Indonesia's case. So again, it's very important to understand that it's just an element to a greater degree of, a greater plan. It's just going to be one little element of that plan. And this is how I think Pakistan can stand to benefit from the JETP mechanism. So currently the crisis that we have, again, it's not just one crisis, it's a combination of different crises or a holy crisis, as you mentioned initially. But Pakistan is struggling on multiple fronts, and our economy isn't able to, sustain new energy projects. For an energy transition to materialize, Pakistan requires a lot of finance to come through. Again, I won't delve into the numbers too much. They're again very evident on where we stand. But it's also important to understand that the investment that Pakistan has locked in coal power projects, they do need an exit facility. There is a lot of opportunity for retirement of coal projects. Yes, our coal fleet is very young. They've just been added. They are still, at a very initial phase, they're doing their recoveries essentially. But at that stage, we also see that there is a lot of opportunity in terms of driving down the cost of energy in Pakistan. So if you're paying around 14 cents for kilowatt hour, adding more renewables could actually be more cost efficient rather than just burning. The generation of coal power projects could essentially be offset by setting up new renewable energy projects. So again, it makes more economic sense for Pakistan to think on the lines of a transition away from coal and towards renewables. But again, the most important takeaway that I wanted to highlight was that a JETP, and not just any JETP, a well-designed JETP. So by well-designed, I mean it shouldn't just be adding to the loans of a country. It shouldn't just be demanding increased IPPs or increased tariffs, as was the case in South Africa. But it can essentially help us tip the required RE financing in favor of renewable energy in Pakistan. It is not the solution. Again, it will provide the market with a key signal to incentivize RE financing. So again, one of the most important things is the implementation part. I can't stress this enough. This has been a key component of all the presentations that we've seen as of yet. But the implementation can help mobilize the hard-to-attain climate finance that Pakistan has failed to attain through different mechanisms. We also think that a CIP can essentially delink energy and politics in Pakistan. So what we can do through a CIP is come up with a plan that will actually last beyond the time span of permits in Pakistan. So CIP will also, provide the right stable environment that so many investors desire in Pakistan to put their money in. And then again, I guess Fiza also highlighted that while these mechanisms are very important, they need to be done in a very just and inclusive manner. So if there is a way to hard code the just part into it, there are different experiences, there are different examples, but for Pakistan, having the ability to develop its own CIP can actually lead us to hard code a lot of the just energy transition elements into our JP if and when we undertake this activity. I also think, again, there are a lot of opportunities to be unlocked. There is that in a JETP, there is a lot of opportunity of closer coordination. In Pakistan, that's one of the areas where we've been lacking a lot, not only between at an interministerial level, but also between provinces and the center. So while designing a JETP, there are working groups that are established, there are certain interfaces that are established. While developing the CIP, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So all of that can help Pakistan, not only through this mechanism, but come up with a plan which will help us, tap into a lot of the financial avenues that will be opening up, be it climate finance, be it transition finance, be it, L&D whenever that materializes. So essentially, yes, there are a lot of opportunities. JETP can be a great way of accelerating the energy transition in Pakistan. It could send the right market signal for private investment to flow through, for Pakistan to be on par with the Southeast Asian market, which is again very commercially right now. It's one of the hottest markets for energy transition. But also you have to keep in mind that it has to be very well designed. There has to be a lot of local involvement, local ownership. Matt also referred to how it shouldn't be dependency, it should be capacity building, and that is one of the key elements that the JETP and ETM should undertake once. And essentially, these are things that could be coded into the design. So a well-designed facility can be of a lot of value. A poor one can set us back in terms of accelerating the energy transition as well. So take it with a pinch of salt, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I'll stop here and happy to circle back.
Yes, thank you so much, Mustafa, for again giving us a way forward for going ahead with the JETPs in Pakistan. I think, Mustafa, we'll be coming back to you with a couple of questions, I think again. But as of now, we have been joined by Ms. Afia as well. Ms. Afia, just give a brief introduction, is currently working as a senior research economist at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, and she has over 30 years of experience in energy economics, regulatory economics, addressing the energy sector issues of Pakistan, including the power crisis, secular debt, corporate governance issues as well. So I think, Ms. Afia, coming to you, what key question would be that you have been listening to the discussion going around the just energy transition partnerships Pakistan, and also Mustafa linked it with how real implementable just model should look like. So perhaps, I think, based upon your experience and working in the field of the power sector, how do you see a real implementable just energy transition partnership model should look like in Pakistan, put in relevance to its linkages with coal, renewable energy, and even going beyond this with any linkages to the remote areas of access to the remote areas as well. So yeah, over to you, Ms. Afia. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Ved. Am I audible? Okay, thanks. Due to massive innovations and technological improvements in renewable energy and storage technologies, along with the massive cost reductions, these solutions have become competitive, not only in terms of cost, but all the previous concerns of intermittency issues of renewables have also been addressed by innovations through storage solutions. These sources of energy are now well suited to grid balancing, which used to be the main concern. As already said in the previous presentations, in the global plans and discussions to counter climate change impact, the path to leapfrog from coal to clean energy is quite clear. But despite all innovations and cost reductions and global commitments, transition to renewable energy will be an uphill task for Pakistan due to the existing coal capacity within the system. Yes, finance is an issue, but inconsistent policy towards renewables is also an issue in the case of Pakistan. In the electricity fuel mix of Pakistan, for instance, in the latest figure for fiscal year 2021, coal share was 18% of the total. Pakistan is a developing economy, and given the enormous coal resources in the country, in many government quarters, coal is considered a stable source of energy. And I believe similar issues are also faced in India. Secondly, under the CPAC projects or 2015 generation policy, several coal-fired power plants have entered the system. These projects have long-term agreements, 30 years or so, and with sovereign guarantees. It will not be an easy task for the government to immediately shut down these plants due to capacity payments and the circular debt issue. Additionally, in the global economy has been experiencing a commodity super cycle due to many factors, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict combined with the COVID-related logistic issues relating to rising prices and disruptions in global supply chains. So high natural gas prices globally and depleting local gas reserves have increased Pakistan's reliance on coal for generating power. And as per our existing energy plan, IGCEP, Integrated Generation Capacity Expansion Plan, despite the addition of renewable energy, coal capacity will increase even further by 2031. And it is expected that from 2021, the capacity of 5,280 megawatt in 2021, it will increase to more than 9,000 by 2031, coal capacity in the electricity fuel mix. In the case of Pakistan, energy planning over the years have always been reactive, lacking coherence, foresight, as well as cost consciousness. So instead of putting in system of planning and management that seek to match supply and demand, governments have haphazardly thrashed about looking for quick fixes involving expensive supply contracts and costly projects without looking into its environmental implications. Unfortunately, in our planning strategies, non-commercial sources have never been accounted for. Non-commercial energy, which is used in the remote areas where there is no access to electricity. No doubt, Pakistan has considerable wind and solar potential. Renewable sources of energy are well suited to meet energy demand needs, specifically for those remote areas with no access to grid electricity or areas where the demand is undermet. And they are relying on non-commercial energy sources like wood. And deforestation is also a challenge with reference to climate change in the case of Pakistan. As you all know, more than 50 million are without access to electricity, while more than 90 million of our population's demand for energy is unmet because of supply unreliability and power outages. And for secure, adequate financing for renewable energy projects, specifically when we talk about remote areas with unmet or undermet energy demand, addressing legal and regulatory barriers is also a big challenge that need to be overcome. Another challenge is the lack of coordinated efforts at various levels, including national, regional, and local level. And specifically for our remote areas with no access to grid, there is a need to attract investment from various sources in generation, transmission, and supply with focus on decentralized microgrids. Reliable supply of electricity in these areas will ensure not only economic growth, but job creation for the young population, which is badly needed in those areas. No doubt, multinational, intergovernment, and multi-stakeholder collaborations are the key to adjust energy transition to tackle climate energy issues. Local communities can shape their future themselves. Communities, they must find innovative ways based on their local conditions to make their cities and towns livable and resilient. Community organizations can also do wonders, and some of the communities are doing so in the case of Pakistan. For instance, some of the village organizations in Gilgit-Baltistan, in the 90s, with the support of Aga Khan Rural Support Program, the village organization in the village of Ahmedabad, they built a 50 kilowatt micro hydel project in Hunza. And learning from the operation of this 50 kilowatt power plant, the members of the village and women organizations upgraded the capacity to 700 kilowatt and established a power utility company, which is now providing a reliable, clean energy to the entire Union Council of LPID, which consists of almost 1,500 households. So Ahmedabad is the only village in GB where all households of the village have access to community-owned consistent energy supply for cooking and heating homes. This village has demonstrated local level capacity in managing local resources for good of the people and for the environment. And 40 years ago, this village people decided not to wait for anyone else to come and change their living conditions. They started working using three principles: organization, investment through individual savings, and skill development. Similarly, there are several other good examples in Chitral where through partnerships with international, local communities and the provincial governments, they are helping in meeting their energy needs through green energy sources. Local governments, they can address these aspects in their communities, in their own governmental operations. Yet, they can't operate in isolation on a large scale. They need to work in synergy with the national government and at the regional level and the provincial level, and also with the support of international donor agencies, each with its specific mandate and role while addressing the climate issues as well as meeting the energy needs of the those areas. In the end, I will say the investment in renewables will improve lives of people in remote areas in Pakistan. It will ensure growth in economic activities and complement actions which are most needed as a mitigation efforts to reduce negative impact of climate change and improving the health of the fragile mountain ecology. And when we talk about JT, Just Energy Transition Partnership, we should not only consider moving from coal to renewables, but also focus should be on non-commercial energy like wood, which is leading to deforestation and one of the major cause of flooding in Pakistan. And one final point, over the last year, massive floods, the government in Pakistan has encompassed ambitious climate goals. These actions have paved the way for international donors to commit external financial resources. So, but such partnerships require strong political will, coherent policy at the government, national level, and coordination among all stakeholders, among all relevant institutions, to ensure effective implementation of all its goals and objectives. Thank you. This is all from my side.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Afia, for highlighting the much needed interventions for renewable energy, particularly in the off-grid communities in these areas. So yeah, very well noted points, I think. I'll try to link the same thing with, I'll be requesting the remarks from SN Javed Saab next. And I think SN Saab, just again, you have been working with the SAARC countries, and given the whole discussion going around the JETPs, what particular projects, renewable energy projects, or projects do you think needs to be included in the Just Energy Transition partnerships for financing? And along with this, if you want to address any of your particular views around the theme. So yeah, over to you, Yasin Saab. Thank you so much for joining. Yasin Saab, you're muted. Sorry, you're muted. I think we can't hear you. Sorry. No, you're not audible. I think you're muted from yourself.
Okay, can I?
Yes, yes. But I think since there's an echo, so you have, yeah, you should be able to
Is
hear
it
me.
okay now? So very sorry, Ubaid. Actually, there's some problem with the laptop microphone, so I'll
No
just connect it to my mobile phone. So first of all, thank you very much, SDPI, for giving me the opportunity to speak on such an interesting topic. So from my side, I had prepared few points, but since you have already initiated the discussion on type of projects which Pakistan could benefit from the JET-P. So my take on this is that, Ubaid, we have to go a bit on the background thing. Like, for example, for me, power sector basically had a recently approved document by NTDC, which is called the Integrated Generation Capacity Plan of Pakistan. So basically, for the audience which does not know about it, that plan basically gives a guideline on how power sector of Pakistan will increase its capacity within the next period of 10 years time, and how it will go from fossil to the clean energy in next 30 years time. And I have few statistics. For example, if we see on the electricity side in Pakistan right now, we are standing on something like 40% of hydro and renewable energies, plus the fossil fuel stands on the 58%. So now we have to go from this 40, 50, 40, 60 percentage to fossil 32% and clean energy 68% as per that plan, whereby we have to move from 2021 to 2031. So for that to happen, there is a minimum amount of 20 to 25,000 of clean energy investment may be required in 10 years time. So renewable has to go to 20, 25,000 in few years time. So for that, we need a huge amount of investments. And for example, but the good part is that the already groundwork has already been completed. For example, I will write to quote on the policy side, like government has already approved a very favorable policy back in 2006. Then again, it gave a very good policy on the reverse auctioning mechanism recently, whereby government wants to go to these untapped potential of renewable energies in the country, specifically solar and wind. So on top of that, we had a big study conducted by World Bank back in 2021, whereby the World Bank had identified excellent renewable energy, economically viable resources all around the country. So for that resources to be tapped, there is a minimum grade investment required if we want to go to 20% RE in future. But if we want to go as per the policy, if we want to go to 30% RE, we need a bit of an investment on the infrastructure side. That is as per the report. And it says that it has already identified list of those priority sites in all across Pakistan, whereby resource potential of solar wind is available. Plus on top of that, grid infrastructure is strong enough to evacuate power from those power generation sources. Thirdly, those priority sites are near the load centers of Pakistan. For example, I was listening to a presentation by Dr. Saab in the first session, whereby he mentioned that our problem is that the power has to be evacuated from the southern side to the northern side, and that is the big problem, the infrastructure. So that study has already identified those areas whereby power centers are very close to those centers. So thereby that evacuation and that transmission problem is a bit resolved. Plus those priority sites, the land availability is also there. So keeping in view all these 4 or 5 issues, there were like 30, 40 sites already identified by a very detailed study conducted in 2021. So from my side, I would say that policy is already there. The government action and the strategy and they want to go on the side of renewables and clean energy, plus the groundwork as far as technical and economical evaluation is done on that is already done. So now the next thing is for the investment to call in for realizing these projects. I think the already groundwork is already there, so we should go for all these investments in these areas. So that is part one of my answer to your questions. Plus on top of that, we have been hearing about, I've heard to few experts and they were stating some problems which are associated with the coal and other fossil fuel, like for example global warming. But then in Pakistan, people try to raise questions on the thing that, okay, we have already contributed less than 1% of the global warming. Why we are going to go for renewable, expensive renewable energy sources? But I would like to point out one very important issue, that not only these fossil fuel or coal power plants are detrimental to the global greenhouse emissions and the global warming, but they are also very bad for the local air pollution. People try to forgive this thing. I mean, the local air pollution and local ecology of our environment is also already damaged by this one. And we have already seen what has been the impact of these on the agriculture, on the northern side, on the glaciers and these things. So we have to keep this thing in our mind. Plus, I would like to highlight one important point, that in future, all the developed countries are going to open markets, open their trading markets or products for only those countries which are investing in clean energy. Plus, they are producing that product from the clean energy. So that is also a very important potential area where we have to keep ourselves in mind, that if we go for fossils, our industry is going to lose that opportunity, which we will be losing that opportunity, which other developing countries may be able to gain it, because they are investing on a huge amount of energy, on huge amount of investment on clean energy. On the project side, I've already said that renewable energies projects are feasible, economically viable, and investments are required to be done on it. Plus, from the previous expert, I would try to add up on her suggestion about the micro hydro, or those areas which are not connected to the grid. So for those areas, off-grid projects plus those projects which are microgrid, mini grid projects should be implemented in those areas. We have seen the example of northern areas, whereby huge amount of micro hydro projects were installed by our Khan community, and those are running perfectly fine. And the benefit of that one is that it is not putting a load on the national transmission grid. So those projects are should be more developed, should be more supported by the government through policies, through providing enabling environment for developing these projects. Plus, they are also beneficial for those marginalized communities and vulnerable societies, whereby they don't have access to electricity, and they need to have electricity for making their economic condition better in the future. So these projects are very important for them. So our last point is that I would like to emphasize on the importance of pumped hydro and battery storage technologies. Nowadays, globally, every country is working, every country is trying to develop it. Battery storage technologies, we have seen in Australia and other developed countries, they are trying to put up huge bank of those lithium-ion batteries, whereby they are basically fed electricity by the solar and wind electricity. Plus, when required, they are able to give the small chunk of extra energy which is required during the excessive amount of demand in the cities and load centers. So that is important. Pumped hydro is important. So this is all from my side. I would like to address any other question if you have. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Hassan Saab, for again highlighting the projects that could be actually included. And I think we will be coming back to you with a question that what could be the possibility of having a SAARC own just energy transition partnership. But I think before that, let us go to one of our very key experts over here, Mr. Radhan Raditya from IESR. So I think Raditya Saab, you have been listening to the discussions on, we initially discussed possibilities of JETPs from Michael Waldron, and then we actually discussed the ETM. You also heard from country colleague Saya Harana around what the ETM implementation. So I think I'm just linking this with this. How do you see what are some of the very key lessons and best practices that can be applied to foster a just inclusive energy transition from Indonesia to other developing countries, and how Pakistan can particularly draw from Indonesia's experience with just energy transition processes. So yeah, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this great event and fruitful discussion, I believe. I'd like to share my presentation if that's okay. Okay.
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, so just a little bit touch on the context that we are currently at. So Indonesia currently is experiencing so the emissions, the GHG emissions is largely comes from the power sector. So around 40% of the Indonesia's GHG emissions comes from the power sector. And if we look at the generation mix that is depicted in the graphic within the slide, then it comes as no surprise that the contribution of the power sector is really that high, because by 2022, I think, as you can see there, the generation mix of coal, the share of within the generation mix accounts up to 67.2%, and this is, I think, twice the share of the coal within the global generation mix. So yeah, and I think that would be a challenge for the Indonesia itself to achieve an early net zero emissions. So this is a study from ISR that was conducted alongside the University of Maryland. So we tried to look at the possibility of achieving early net zero emissions by 2050. And the trajectory of the CO2 emissions can be seen on the left-hand side, the graph on the left-hand side. So it should be, so the generation from the coal should be reduced immediately by now, and by 2045, it should be completely phased out of the system. In terms of capacity, so by 2030, you need to phase out by 9.2 gigawatts, and then this is followed by 21.7, and then the rest would have to be phased out between 2040 and 2045. This is just to be aligned with the 1.5 degree pathway as agreed in the Paris Agreement. So prior to the launch of the JETP, actually the government of Indonesia has already enacted this presidential regulation, number 112, 2022. So within the regulation is actually a mandate on one of them to end the operational of the coal-fired power plants earlier than as it used to. And the roadmap should be developed by the MEMR. And as mandated there as well, it should include the very least strategy to how to end this coal-fired power plants earlier than its general lifetime. And it also includes the reduction of the GHG emissions. And the regulation also includes the moratorium of new CFPP, of course, and then we can see there are some exceptions here. The first one is all the coal-fired power plants already in the planning that before the enactment of this regulation could be allowed to continue. And then there are some also exceptions for plants that are integrated with industry that promotes the national economic growth. And then if these plans are to be allowed to continue, then they have to willingly commit to reduce their GHG emissions by 35% after they have been in operation for 10 years. And lastly, all of these power plants need to be phased out by 2050. The other instruction includes a mandate to the state-owned utility company PLN to carry out the early retirement of the coal-fired power plant, either the assets that are owned by PLN or by the IPP. And also there's also an instruction to the government itself to provide a adequate fiscal support through a number of mechanisms or framework. This includes the blended financing that can be sourced from the national state budget or other financing sources. And lastly, it should also include a fiscal support that needs to be regulated under the Ministry of Finance regulation. So I'll start to jump into the JETP that we are currently having at the moment. So the joint statement of the JETP, as you probably all already know, includes a targets for the power sector as a whole. And what that means is that all the coal-fired power plants, no, what I mean is the emissions that is being targeted through the joint statement will apply to the sectors that are connected to, that are on-grid, off-grid, and also those that are outside the PLN business area, which is usually used for the industry. And probably the numbers you have already known and from the news media outlets or from other sources of information. And within the joint statement, we are also asked to provide or to prepare a comprehensive investment policy and planning, and this includes the strategy on how to end the coal-fired power plants utilizations and how to boost the renewable energy subscription within Indonesia's power system, and especially relate with the coal-fired power plant. The document should also include how to on the list of coal-fired power plants that has been identified and prioritized in consultation with, of course, with the PLN, is the state-owned utility company in Indonesia, and also there's a it also includes on how to restrict the development of the captive power plant in Indonesia, and there is also a way to freeze the existing pipeline that is currently already been in the planning. Yeah, so just to give a little bit of context on the current operational, the current planning in the Indonesia's coal-fired power plant. So the PLN state-owned utility company has actually reduced its capacity, additional capacity that comes from the coal-fired power plants. So from the previous one at 27 gigawatts to now in the latest expansion planning document to 13.8. But as you can see from the graph on the right-hand side there, the latest COD year would be in 2027. So if we let this coal-fired power plants to be operational, it will indeed exceed the limit of the 2050 as stipulated in the presidential regulation. So in other words, it could possibly breach the regulation that has been set up by the presidential regulation. So outside the PLN grid, as I mentioned earlier, the capacity is quite worrying actually. So by 2030, there will be an additional of 28 gigawatts, and not the additional, but the total capacity of the coal-fired power plants is estimated to be at 28 gigawatts. So that would that is an increase of around 20 gigawatts from its existing capacity. And in terms of emission, there would be an additional emission of 140 million tons per year by 2030. And the question now, as the JETP includes the targets that covers both the off-grid and the on-grid and the captive coal-fired power plants, then the challenge now is on how to determine the emission reduction contributions from the coal-fired power plants within PLN business area and the outside PLN business areas. Yeah, so on the JETP itself, so as you probably all know, the secretariat has been set up and it has about 4 working groups. And for the JETP secretariat, this has been coordinated by the coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment, but there are also other relevant ministries that are involved within this secretariat, such as the MEMR, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprise. And of the working groups, the first one is in the technical working group, and the second one there's the finance and policy, and lastly there's the just transition working group. And ISR has been actually involved in the technical working group alongside the IEA, the RMI, and World Bank. And as you probably all know as well, the Secretariat is currently developing the comprehensive investment plan and policy. And as mentioned by the keynote speaker at the beginning of this discussion, it serves as a living document, so it will be updated to the current regulation of the current market conditions. And there are some guiding principles, of course, in this document. So the first one, the document should reflect the plan that is contributing towards Indonesia's economy and also ensuring its energy affordability. And the second principle is that the energy security and grid stability should be at the heart of this document and in the planning of the power system. And also, lastly, the principle is on the how to ensure the achievement of joint target and carbon emissions that is in line with the government emissions. And of course, the content of the investment plan in general, I can say that it includes the decarbonization vision of Indonesia, JETP target, and energy transition pathways. And the second content that we can draw out from this document at the moment is that it also includes a portfolio of JETP programs that are focusing on 5 investment areas, which are going to be, which I will try to explain next. And lastly, the content is on how to implement the plan, the policy, the financing, and also the just transition enablers that is required to ensure the success of the energy transition in Indonesia. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 5 investment focus areas that are included in the document. These 5 investment focus areas are related to the transmission lines and grid deployment. As you can see, there has been a detail there, and it includes the expansion of the transmission lines within and between power systems, because right now Indonesia has isolated power system because it's an archipelagic country. So each island has its own power system, and to be able to increase the renewable share, one of the way to do that is to build an interconnectivity between these islands or power systems. And also within this investment focus area, there is also a need to implement an advanced control system to accommodate VRE. So as we all know that if we have a high share of VRE, the grid would experience and could experience instability due to the intermittency nature of the VRE. So an advanced control center is an important aspects to be considered in advancing the transmission line and grid deployment. And lastly, on this investment focus area is the development and implementation of a smart grid. And on the second investment focus area, there's this early coal-fired power plant retirement, which is essentially on how the investment required to phase down this coal-fired power plants earlier than as it used to, and as we all know, if we stop the coal-fired power plants earlier, then there will be a investment that has not been returned due to the earlier phase down of the coal itself. So how to ensure that the investment for this coal-fired power plants owner to be returned is part of the investment focus areas that has been laid out in the JETP CIPP. And also on the third area is the baseload renewable energy deployment and acceleration. So this includes the development of hydroelectric and geothermal and other form of baseload energy power plants. And in the fourth area, we have the deployment of acceleration of VRE. This includes the solar, wind, and other sources of VRE. And lastly is the enhancement of the renewable value chain. And so this is more on increasing the local content, domestic capability in manufacturing the renewables energy infrastructure. So yeah, and within the document itself, it has also actually identify and prioritize which area that is going to be focusing. So it's still subject to the discussion, so I cannot share that at the moment. So on the challenges, I think we have a limited time to come up with the investment document with the August here as the deadline. And by July, it's expected that the output of the analysis carried out within the working groups will need to be fed into the document itself. So as within the working group itself, so at least from our experience so far, data transparency and availability remains an issue despite working alongside the state-owned utility company. They remain on their stance to not really share the data required to support the carry out the analysis that is needed. So I think this would hamper the progress of each partner involved within the technical working group to carry out the assigned task. Yeah, so that would be the challenges. So just to touch a little bit as my last point in this presentation. So PLN is also considering another scheme of early retirement. So this is called the spin-off. So they have two cases here. So the first one is the Palabuhan Ratu coal-fired power plants with capacity of around 1,000 megawatts, and there's also Pacitan coal-fired power plants with a capacity of around 600 megawatts. And the plan is to sell this coal-fired power plants to another business entity, and in this case, it will be a state-owned companies, which is a coal mining company, Bukit Asam, and the refinancing will be done through a blended finance. And the ownership, so PLN here will not let go entirely of the ownership, so around 70% will be let go to this new owner, and the rest of the 30% will be owned by PLN subholding. In this case, it's PLN. It's either PLN Nusantara Power, or PLN Indonesia Power. So I think that's the last point that I will share from my presentation. Looking forward if there's any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much again, Radhan, for staying with us and taking us through the journey of Indonesia for the just energy transition partnerships. I think there's a lot for here to discuss as well, but I think just in the interest of time, if we do have any final remarks from any of our panelists, I know we were supposed to also, briefly just summarize all the key recommendations we have over here. So Ehsan Saab, Mustafa, Ms. Hafia, if you have any final recommendations before we move towards Dr. Hassan Daud Bhatt for his concluding. Okay, so yeah, I think we'll be definitely be coming back to you before I go to Dr. Hassan Daud, but we'll be actually coming back to you with a very detailed assessment based upon today's discussion. But very importantly, what taking lead from what Michael highlighted in this initial presentation on the JETPs, and then going in depth into the challenges and prospects for Asian Development Bank's energy transition mechanism in Pakistan, which we discussed about, and what different stakeholders in Pakistan as well as abroad do feel about, in other countries, particularly Indonesia, do feel about the preliminary findings coming out from ADB's energy transition mechanisms, and what do we suggest that what changes are required at the methodological and as well as on their implementation sides as well. And then I think after that, we've also very extensively covered what could be the governance structure, what could be the way forward for just energy transition partnerships in Pakistan. So yeah, we'll be definitely be taking this much more forward. We'll be engaging with you a lot more on the subject topic. We see a lot of expertise that have joined us today. So with this note, I'll be going to Dr. Hassan Daud Bhatt. Dr. Hassan, so if you for your thanks, and if you have anything particular to address to this stage and with the stakeholders who have joined us today. So yeah, over to you, Dr. Hassan. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And Ubaid, it's always good to hear professionals speaking about something that addresses us. And for me, it is not a matter of
technology transfer or a transition. It is a matter of socio-economic development that this country has to take. And I think it's a vector of economic decisions. It's not just you can work on certain things in isolation, because I believe that still about 80% of the global population lives in countries that are net importers of energy. So when you look at this and when you look at the fossil fuel and the kind of subsidies that are being given to fossil fuel, it is actually mind-boggling. And also the challenges that have been highlighted earlier by our colleagues. I would rather speak on the opportunities in terms of course, this energy being cheaper. Of course, it has the capacity to create jobs, and as per a rough estimate, it can create around 5 million jobs going forward by 2035 and by till 2050 when we are going towards net zero. And of course, it makes economic sense, because when you supply energy with clean, greener sources of energy, the cost of doing business becomes better. And it's at the end of the day, in terms of industrial development and economic agenda, it's about doing business with less cheaper sources of utilities. So what I look at is, and perhaps also echo what Antonio Guterres said about the United Nations Secretary General said, that it's time to stop burning our planet and start investing in the abundant renewable energy all around us. And I sincerely believe that we have abundance of resources. But we also have to look at this as a matter of a global agenda. And when I say global agenda, I speak on this based on two aspects. One is the accessibility of the input resources. So if any country has excess of that, they can actually supplement the kind of R&D that is being done around this to make it more cheaper, more accessible. The other thing that I would rather like to look at is perhaps create a system where, and in this transition, and please remember, all of you, that the process of transition and change is always difficult. And the ease that you can create on the public sector side is by creating the enabling environment, and on private sector side by supporting the public sector to take that one step, because there will be a lot of novelty in this, and when there are novel ideas, public sector comes under stress. So in order to do that, the private sector has to do hand-holding in terms of addressing the energy infrastructure, the administration and governance challenges, the deficiencies in terms of the narrative that is to be built around the energy transition, and also looking at these challenges and addressing them based on local agenda, because Indonesia might have its own local environment and the governance structure. We might have our own. So learning from their best practices and some of the other countries that are here to support us and agencies also. I think Pakistan has a very bright future in terms of renewable energy. The government is providing a top-down approach. It's just that we need to leverage from our natural endowment, perhaps looking at new technology. The academia, industry, and perhaps the government linkages has to be developed so that a better narrative, a better R&D structure has to be developed so that this transition is easier than what is happening now. And then perhaps look at the level of investment that has to take shape in this, because I believe the investment for us to reach to net zero perhaps will be around 5.9 to 6 billion annually, and that is not possible for one country to take that. And then you just can't leave countries like us and perhaps Bangladesh, who are hit hard by the climate change, and we do not have the resources to address that. So countries have to, the developed countries have to support developing countries and not so developed countries in this transition, because the earth is surrounded by green gas, which has been produced by fossil fuel. And if we take this step now, we are helping our next generation. Remember, as has been said several times, there is no plan B as there is no planet B. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan Dawood, for your wonderful remarks. I think with this will be closing our session. And again, thank you all for joining us today and for your wonderful interventions and remarks. And just like I mentioned, as far as the ADBZ team is concerned, this is not an end from our end. We have just started working around this, and we'll be again engaging a lot with all of you from the international experts from civil society, and we'll be we'll shortly be coming an analysis based on today's discussion, as well as some modeling which is being conducted at SDPI. So with this, thank you so much again for joining us today, and we'll definitely keep in touch with you all. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.